Chapter 377. Chasing and killing the demons in the black cloud took quite a bit of effort. Wang Lu only used his non-phase sword, which was a purely defensive counterattack swordsmanship. Facing the fleeing demons, Wang Lu, due to various considerations, did not use the skill that he learned from the sword demon in the ancient sword tomb. Even his original magical ability was hidden. Purely relying on the counterattack power of his non-phase sword and his extraordinary agility, he caught up with and beheaded the group of demons in the sky one by one. However, the advantage was that, when he finally beheaded this group of demons, he no longer needed to bother to find their stronghold and start the second round of the plot. Because the kings of the stronghold had been alarmed by this one-sided massacre and took the initiative to come down the mountain. The three kings on the mountain, each of them was a fully humanoid monster with the strength of a king pill. In addition, there were more than 20 peak shoot-on-stage bodyguards, as well as hundreds of other large and small demons, which was truly a monstrous ferocity. However, this battle was much more tragic. Wang Lu single-handedly fought against hundreds of demons, causing the sky to darken and the earth to turn dark, and blood flowed like a river. In this battle, even with his profound cultivation base, Wang Lu could not choose to fight the enemy head-on. No matter how strong his defense was, no matter how exuberant his vitality was, if he were to exchange blood for blood with hundreds of demons, the gains would not make up for the losses. Therefore he first defended himself, showing weakness to the enemy. After reducing his sword defense to 10 zhong, under the spell of the group of demons, it suddenly looked like a storm. Tian Dao Lan and the others, who were tied up by the ropes, were so shocked that their beautiful faces turned pale. They hugged each other and shivered. It was normal for several Foundation establishment stage cultivators to be restless in the face of a king pill level demon technique. Wang Lu was just thinking that if he had not shrunk his sword defense to a radius of 10 zhong, the 4 weak chickens behind him would have been squeezed together with him. Wang Lu, on the other hand, was showing weakness to the enemy. His arrogance grew as time went by. The great demons in the mountain stronghold were instantly filled with confidence. They bombarded him with all kinds of demonic arts without any regard for their lives. 2 hours later, half of the mountain where Wang Lu was standing was forcefully flattened. The few great demons were also exhausted to the point of panting. At this moment, Wang Lu finally began his counterattack. Taking advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness, his first sword strike deflected a bolt of demonic lightning, engulfing a great demon in purplish-black thunderfire. The body that had been tempered by the essence of the world and the scarlet blood inner core instantly turned into charcoal and fell to the ground. With one of the 3 demon kings dead, the other 2 demon kings were horrified and wanted to retreat. However, Wang Lu's face turned pale and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He seemed to be seriously injured. This scene caused the Monster King to mutter again. Was he pretending to be weak, or was he bluffing? According to the strength of this group of demon kings, under the indiscriminate bombardment, let alone the cultivator with the king pill, even a low-level Yuanying stage cultivator would find it difficult to resist. He was only a peak shoot-on stage cultivator, so he should be relying on the power of some magical tool or elixir. And those things wouldn't last long. Thinking of this, one of the more radical Monster Kings summoned dozens of guards and jointly released millions of poisonous insects. These poisonous insects were refined from the blood essence of an unknown number of people. They were small but sinister. They had sharp horns that could pierce through gold and stone. Their bodies were full of toxins that could corrode the bones and devour the heart. What was more, the attack of these poisonous insects could not be reflected by the non-phase nameless sword. Even though Wang Lu could support the non-phase sword defense and crush the millions of poisonous insects into powder, he couldn't hurt the Monster King who released the insects. This was the inherent defect of non-phase sword. This method was famous for its defense, but it lacked the means to injure the enemy. Nameless sword could only be effective with the help of the big heart demon oath. Thus there were many inconveniences in using it. Were it not so, when Sword Demon taught him the heaven-splitting sword, Wang Lu wouldn't have been entangled. However, after several months of practice in the Western continent, as well as more than a year of painstaking cultivation in the mountain, he was no longer the same as before. The inherent flaw of the nameless sword might not be able to be made up, but as long as he cleverly used various means, these poisonous insects were not difficult for him. When the black swarm of insects came, Wang Lu just threw out the sword of Mount Kuan in his hand. The simple and unadorned sword light drew a sharp straight line, cutting through the swarm of insects like a hot knife through butter. The Monster King who released the insects was startled. He wondered if this was the counterattack before the other party died. This flying sword was full of spiritual light and awe-inspiring sword intent. Obviously, it was a spiritual treasure-level sword. Moreover, the sword spirit was not ordinary. Although this sword seemed simple, it could not be underestimated. That Monster King inwardly said that it was best to withdraw and avoid the sharp edge. However, at this time, he couldn't act at will while controlling the swarm of insects. Thereupon, he resorted to the demon tool that protected his body, triggering several magnetic lightning rays in an attempt to shake the flying sword's momentum. However, just as the lightning rays appeared, the flying sword flashed, and a figure appeared without any warning in the position of the flying sword. The magnetic lightning rays were too late to stop and immediately hit that person's body. The next moment, that Monster King felt a heart-wrenching pain as the magnetic lightning rays were actually bounced back to him. A long time ago, this human sword exchange spell was used by Lu Li to fight against Wang Lu in the arena. It was a superior skill in the brilliant sword heart. Now, it was absorbed and digested by Wang Wu and integrated into the non-phase method system. Combined with the nameless sword, it had a unique effect. In the blink of an eye, 2 of the 3 Monster Kings had fallen. The remaining Monster King no longer dared to act rashly. He turned around and ran away. However, just as he was about to launch his movement technique, he felt a hand on his shoulder. This shock was no small matter. The Demon King's demon core almost cracked. However, as the leader of the 3 kings, it reacted quickly. It suppressed its instinct to counterattack and activated the many demon artifacts on its body. Then, it resolutely used its killer move. "Taoist Master, please spare my life." A trembling voice begging for mercy came out, which was full of sincerity. This made Wang Lu's hand on his shoulder loosen. The next moment, the Monster King's sharp counterattack followed. For demons and monsters, the law of the jungle was the law of nature. Expecting the strong to spare their life was a stupid mistake that only human beings would make. However, wasn't this godlike young man a human being? Especially at such a young age, with such a powerful cultivation base, it was likely that he was the kind of arrogant and insufferably arrogant novice. And for a novice, it was easy to be sneak attacked. Seeing that he was tricked, the Monster King immediately turned around and spat out his demon core, launching the most ferocious attack, trying to seek life and death. Although the Monster King had already guessed that the opponent's most powerful skill was defensive counterattack, and the stronger the attack, the heavier the counterattack would be. However, the power of the Monster King's demon core was close to the peak of the King Pill. In such a hurry and at such a close distance, who could come out unscathed? However, when the Monster King turned around, what he saw was a simple and unadorned heavy sword. The tip of the sword was pointed straight at the place where the demon core was spat out. This time, the demon core was actually spat out on the tip of the sword. When a mushroom cloud slowly rose up from the Black Wind Mountain, Wang Lu had already flashed several times and arrived at the foot of the mountain. Using the non-phase sword to resist the explosion of the demon core at a super close distance was definitely a respectable feat for a shoot-on stage cultivator. Even if Wang Lu didn't put these miscellaneous monsters in his eyes at this time, he would not use the nameless sword to absorb the damage and rebound it. If he absorbed the power of the demon core's explosion, even if he didn't die, his jade mansion, which he had been diligently nurturing for a year, would certainly be scrapped, and he wouldn't be able to reach the King Pill realm for a few years. However, Wang Lu could use his absolute defense to reverse the energy of the explosion, making the power of the explosion multiply. And this time, the group of monsters in the Black Wind Mountain were almost completely wiped out. Wang Lu's invincible defense also slightly broke a small hole. Although he could recover at any time, his injury looked quite bleak, which could trigger the healing plot of the village girl. Thus, the second round of the plot came to a successful end. And from here on, it was the real show part, and the difficulty of this level had just begun. Although the first 2 rounds of the plot were chaotic, the focus of this immortal dreamland was not the fight, which could be seen from the fact that Wang Lu easily cleared the fight for 5 people. In this immortal dreamland that specialized in fighting, even the heavenly sword hall elders would find it difficult to move forward. According to Feng Yin Taoist Master, he once saw a peak unity stage cultivator in a high-level immortal dreamland. Fortunately, he barely avoided the fight, which could be regarded as a trick. Otherwise, if they really fought. Alas, then I'm afraid I have to expose my true strength. At that time, listening to Feng Yin Taoist Master's words, Wang Lu was very emotional. From top to bottom, no one in Spirit Sword Mountain really knew shame. However, when Wang Lu triumphantly returned to the village and faced the 4 girls of Yin and Yang school with shining eyes, he could only sigh with emotion. Fortunately, this immortal dreamland does not specialize in fighting. Otherwise, I'm afraid my true strength would be exposed. With the chattering of these girls, he did not expect them to keep a secret, and it was not convenient for him to show some of his cards. However, soon, Wang Lu had no time to think about his cards. The enthusiastic offensive of the girls caught him off guard. Wang Lu, you're so handsome. Wang Lu, please let me give you a baby. I really can't help it. Wan Er, Ying Tao and the others were completely intoxicated. As the big sister, Tian Dao Lan was slightly more sedate. She softly sighed and said, "It turns out the lead disciple of the 5 uniques is so powerful. You're only in the peak Shudan stage, but you can kill a king pill level monster like cutting melons and vegetables. I used to think that the lead disciple of our Yin and Yang school is already a first-class talent in 9 regions, and they are not much stronger than me. But now I know that I'm really a frog in a well." Wang Lu smiled and didn't say anything. In the path of immortal cultivation, the gap between people was almost infinite. As an ancient sect, the qualification and perception of all the cultivators in Lingjian school were above the standard. Right now, Tian Dao Lan and the others were roughly at the middle or lower level of the outer court disciples of Spirit Sword sect. However, the inner court disciples of Lingjian school were like Wen Bao and Zhu Qin, who were many times stronger than the outer court disciples. And the evildoers like Lu Li and Zhu Shiyao were many times stronger than Wen Bao and Zhu Qin. The gap between people was so big that it was normal to be a frog in a well before witnessing it with one's own eyes. As a matter of fact, Yin and Yang school was already a top-ranked sect in the 9 regions Wanxian League. Although Tian Dao Lan and the other girls' cultivation base was still shallow, their foundation was actually quite deep. After painstakingly cultivating, there was hope for them to reach Yuanying stage and reach King Pill level, so there was no need to belittle themselves. However, the next moment, Tian Dao Lan changed the topic and seriously said, "I think I have no hope in immortal cultivation in this life, so all my hope is placed on the next generation. I hope that his qualification can really fit the immortal path, so that in the future, he can smoothly pass the immortal path. However, with my qualification alone, I'm afraid it's difficult to meet the demand. Wang Lu, I beg you to help me." Wang Lu immediately spurted out, thinking, "Tian Dao Lan, you're really a talent to be able to say something so high and mighty." Chapter 378. The female cultivators of the Yin Yang sect might not be as good as the other high-rank sects in terms of immortal cultivation, but there must be a reason why the Yin Yang sect could be ranked among the top 100 high-rank sects among the thousands of sects in the Wanxian League. For example, although the Yin Yang sect was named after Yin and Yang, the Yin Yang sect had more women than Yang. There were less than 100 male cultivators among the tens of thousands of female cultivators. Those male cultivators were more like onlookers than cultivators. Although they were envied by many male cultivators who couldn't find a partner in the outside world, it was said that their lives were quite bitter. With so many female cultivators, the Yin-Yang sex cultivation method was unique in maintaining beauty, and the dual cultivation method could be mutually beneficial with others, so the relationship between the Yin-Yang sect and most sects was relatively harmonious. Even though the disciples of the sect were too open and enthusiastic, which made their reputation quite controversial, there were still countless sects that were willing to be on good terms with the Yin-Yang sect. At least, the 5 super sects of the Wanxian League had established friendly relations with the Yin-Yang sect, which was an achievement that only less than 1/3 of the hundreds of high-rank sects could achieve. And how could a sect that was so good at diplomacy be weak? Of course, everything had its advantages and disadvantages. The Yin-Yang sect spent too much energy on diplomacy and friendship, so it was inevitable that they were ridiculed for not doing their proper work. In addition, there were too many unpleasant words, so there was no need to repeat them one by one. Wang Lu had been on the road for more than 10 years, and he had heard many similar rumors. However now, when he personally faced the passionate and unrestrained Yin and Yang schoolgirls, he truly realized that those sarcastic remarks were either from the female cultivators or the Yin and Yang schoolgirls who looked down on them, and thus, hated them. Otherwise, who would hate such a group of naive and unaffected little girls? And when Tian Dao Lan absurdly asked for the union with the reason that everything was for the sake of the next generation, Wang Lu saw sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't talking nonsense, but sincerely thought so. Regarding this, Wang Lu had to admit that he was impressed. The Yin-Yang sect's ability to train disciples was really good. In the face of such a request, how many single male cultivators in the world could resist? No, even if they were not single, not many people could resist. Fortunately, in order to avoid trouble, the Yin-Yang sect strictly forbade disciples from destroying the marriage of others. Therefore, many people were spared. Wang Lu, what do you think? There are 4 of us. You should at least pick one of us. Of course, it's better if you pick all of us. We sisters have always been cultivating together, and we know a lot of postures that require cooperation. We can play with you, okay? Li Qingzi, who was the youngest among them, was the most courageous. She generously pulled Wang Lu's hand. As a result, she only felt a blur in front of her eyes, and her hand felt warm and smooth. It was Tiandao Lan's hand. Wang Lu patted her head and said, "If you're done, go back to the village. We still need you to help us in the 3rd round." When it came to proper business, the girls nodded without hesitation. "No problem. Leave it to us. But remember to treat us well after you're done, hee. You're the child's father." "Whatever you say, we'll do." Wang Lu automatically blocked their nonsense and tied them up again with a rope. Then, he waved at the woman on the village wall and said, "Black Wind Mountain has been flattened by me. Can you open the village gate?" The woman on the wall was still immersed in the earth-shattering explosion and mushroom cloud that happened on the Black Wind Mountain not long ago. She looked at the mountain that seemed to have been cut in half, and her eyes gradually became moist. But soon, she cheered up and said to Wang Lu, Yes, we'll open the door and welcome benefactor." After entering the village, the situation was similar to the experience of Wen Bao and Yu Yun. It was not beyond Wang Lu's expectation. The village was called Peach Blossom Village. There were more than 200 families in the village, and most of them were women. The reason was complicated. In short, most of the good men had unfortunately died, and the village was isolated from the outside world. It was difficult to get new blood from outside. Therefore, the women in the village could be said to be lonely for a long time. When they saw Wang Lu come in, many people's eyes flashed with a similar light as Tiandao Lan and the others. This immortal dreamland, as one of the 36 chains, had a relatively stable structure. At the same time, Wen Bao and Yu Yun were very careful. After 2 rounds, although they were not very clear, they guessed that it would be difficult for them to pass all the plots perfectly. Therefore, they did not really go to the end of the immortal dreamland, but forcibly withdrew midway, leaving behind a trail. The coin that Wen Bao gave to Wang Lu was the proof that the immortal dreamland was not completed. If it was completed, except for specific prizes, no other items could be brought out. Therefore, as the 3rd round explorer, Wang Lu's experience was highly similar to that of the previous 2, which laid a good foundation for him to quickly pass through the difficulties. Wang Lu deliberately got injured when the monster core exploded. After entering the village girls immediately surrounded him and took him to the house of the village's genius doctor. The so-called genius doctor turned out to be a beautiful young girl in her 20s. Of course, the story also gave a reasonable explanation. The real genius doctor was her grandfather, but he died the year before last, leaving her alone. However, the young girl had inherited all of her grandfather's skills and was already qualified to be a genius doctor. The background story barely maintained its rationality. The real key was that the immortal dreamland spared no effort to create such a beautiful village. The village was filled with beautiful women, ranging from 11 or 12 years old with the fire of life and the light of desire, to 14 or 15 years old with a budding beauty, and even to 20.5 years old mature woman. All of them were delicate and alluring, waiting to be plucked. Alas, this immortal dreamland really doesn't know how to adapt to circumstances. After the young genius doctor gave Wang Lu some herbs and bandaged his wound, Wang Lu didn't even care that she was just a mortal, but the elixir she used was effective on a shoot-on stage cultivator. He just sighed with emotion at the rich resources of the beautiful women in front of him. Tisk, if it was a while ago, this would simply be a classic setting of a village erotic novel. It's a stage for me to show off my skills, but unfortunately, there's no chance to do so now. Wang Lu sighed, and his tone sounded a bit regretful. Hey Wang Lu, you don't really want to do anything to these illusion puppets, do you? In a spacious room specially assigned to Wang Lu, Lin Wan pouted and said unhappily, How are us 4 sisters inferior to these village girls? You don't care about us, but you're so interested in them. And you said that you want us to play a role next, but we clearly haven't done anything in the past 2 days. If you don't do anything, then the next step of the plot can happen. Sure enough, on the 3rd day, While Wang Lu was recuperating in his room and his injuries were gradually getting better, the women in the village could not sit still. The beautiful village girl who had talked to Wang Lu on the wall knocked on the door on the morning of the third day. Benefactor, thank you for solving the crisis for Peach Garden Village, but we still have one thing to ask of you. The village girl was somewhat ashamed and nervously said, You have seen it these past 2 days. Because of the previous disaster in our Peach Garden Village, the number of males in the village has withered, and it is difficult to continue. And because of some reasons, we can't leave this place, but in the long run. Wang Lu nodded and smiled. This was the real problem of the immortal dreamland. Previously, when Wen Bao and Yu Yun entered this level, one could not resist the temptation, while the other could, but both of them failed. So, what exactly did these village girls want? Now, it seemed that the answer was obvious. What they wanted was not the simple pleasure of sex, but the reproduction of the village. Yu Yun's decisive refusal was naturally a failure. As for Wen Bao, although he could not resist the temptation, but, alas, there were some things that need not be said in detail, so as not to hurt people. Thus, if they wanted to pass this level, the simplest way was to go all out and quickly make the belly of all the marriageable women in the village, so that they could give birth to healthy offspring and multiply. However, it was absolutely impossible for Wang Lu to make such a big sacrifice for a mere immortal dreamland. Originally, this matter was quite troublesome, but Wang Lu happened to see Tiandao Lan and the others before entering the group of immortal tombs. Thus, everything suddenly became clear. Along the way, regardless of how these 4 little burdens increased the difficulty of the immortal dreamland and kept making noise, it was all for this moment when they could shine. You guys want to multiply? Wang Lu smiled, but his smile was full of sincerity. Then you guys came to ask me, but you're asking the wrong person. The real expert is by my side. The beautiful village girl curiously looked at Tiandao Lan and the others. In the past few days, the women in the village had been drooling over the injured young cultivator. He was young, powerful, had a mysterious background, and had a handsome appearance. He simply had all the elements to attract women. Unfortunately, he wasn't alone. Instead, he had brought 4 female companions. If those 4 girls were ugly and bloated, that would be fine. However, each and every one of them was so shockingly beautiful that it made people feel ashamed of their inferiority. For 3 days, none of those enthusiastic and cheerful village girls dared to take the initiative to enter the door. Until they saw that Wang Lu's injury was about to be healed, the village headwoman had no choice but to come forward. To be honest, toward Tiandao Lan and the other 3 people, the village girls of Peach Garden Village had quite a lot of complaints. However, now that they heard it, could it be that these 4 people were the key to the reproduction of Peach Garden Village? At this time, Wang Lu also said to Tiandao Lan, You've also heard the situation. Next, I'll have to trouble you to show us the most mystical cultivation method of Yin and Yang school, Yin and Yang transformation. It just so happens to be used here. Tiandao Lan said in surprise, You're joking, Yin and Yang transformation is. Wang Lu interrupted her. I know, it's the Yin and Yang school's treasure, a secret that can't be passed on to outsiders, and has endless wonderful uses. But don't you think it's actually just right to be used here? By transforming a trace of Yin Qi into Yang Qi in these women's bodies, there will be a balance of Yin and Yang, and the women will be able to give birth to children and multiply. As for the specific operation method, your Yin and Yang school is also a master in this field. Wasn't the legendary mirror polishing technique invented by you? Previously, you and my master had a lot of fun, right? Moreover, if I remember correctly, your Yin and Yang school has been secretly carrying out this kind of operation. Many of the young female disciples are actually the crystallization of the union of senior female cultivators. Isn't your Yin and Yang school also nicknamed Lily School? Hearing many secrets of the sect being told by Wang Lu, Tiandao Lan was dumbfounded and speechless. Chapter 379. Information was power. Although most of the time, the immortal cultivation world still believed in pure power, the role of information had never been underestimated. Even if it was just gossip information, it could still play a role at a critical moment. Although the girls of the Yin and Yang school appeared to be naive and ignorant of worldly affairs, they were by no means insensible. It was just that out of their friendship and trust with Wang Wu, they would not have any thoughts about Wang Lu. But if Wang Lu dared to seek improper benefits because of this, the girls were not really stupid. For example, if Wang Lu set his mind on the Yin and Yang transformation, the secret technique of the Yin and Yang school, the girls would certainly immediately raise their vigilance and then keep their mouths shut. However, Wang Lu threw out the key gossip at the critical moment, which immediately pierced through Tiandao Lan's heart. She felt that since everything was already known, then, there was nothing she could do but to abandon herself to despair. And think about it this way, this is the immortal dreamland. Once we pass the trial, everything here will disappear. No matter what you say, it's nothing more than telling the treehole, and the secret of your school will not be leaked out. Besides, the 5 of us will pass the trial together, and the reward will be shared, so we should have the same interests. And the proof of passing this test can bring great benefits to your esteemed sect, so why not? Compared with Tiandao Lan and the others, Wang Lu's persuasion skills were really sharp. Tiandao Lan hesitated for a moment, and finally nodded. Wang Lu clapped his hands and said, "A wise choice." A few days later, the sun rose and the moon set. The Peach Blossom Village was filled with music every night, and the beauty of this place was not known to outsiders. A few days later, the Peach Blossom Village was really like its name. The women in the village all had peach blossoms on their faces, and their pretty eyes were watery, which was indescribably charming and moving. The 4 girls of the Yin and Yang school, who were cultivators, looked very tired. The Yin and Yang transformation was a secret of the school, but it did not mean that one had to have a high cultivation base to practice it. It was nothing more than a high cultivation base that would affect the effect of the spell. Even Li Qingzi, who was at the peak of training qi, could use the cultivation method to transfer a trace of congenital yang qi. Although it was weak and mixed, it was already a treasure for mortals in Peach Garden Village. As a result, the 4 female cultivators worked day and night until they were physically and mentally exhausted, helping the mortals of Peach Blossom Village finally realize the magnificent feat of women giving birth to children. When the beautiful and mature village chief happily stroked her flat abdomen that was filled with boundless vitality, the entire village erupted in cheers of boundless vitality. That was the joy of hope. Of course, this was not enough. The success of a single case could not truly prolong the reproduction of the entire village. Therefore, according to Wang Lu's instructions, the group of people resolutely carried out the good deed to the end. Since they had already done it on the first day of the month, what was there to be afraid of on the 15th? The eldest sister, Tiandao Lan, had also written down some basic cultivation methods of Yin and Yang school into books for the predestined people in the village to cultivate. As for how many people were suitable for cultivation in this small mountain village, it was not a problem after Wang Lu took out a large number of man-made spiritual roots. At this point, their investment in Peach Garden Village had reached an astronomical figure. Tiandao Lan and the others had paid several days and nights of hard work, as well as the risk of being held accountable by the sect's elders. And Wang Lu's man-made spiritual roots were worth tens of thousands of pieces, so much so that the several female cultivators were very skeptical about whether Wang Lu could earn back his capital in this round. The several of them had heard a little about the strategy of the group of immortal tombs. According to the experience of the predecessors, the investment in the development process was necessary, but to invest to this extent was really unheard of. In particular, no matter how they thought about it, they couldn't think of the significance of doing this. These man-made spiritual roots were a long-term plan, but in the immortal dreamland, there was no need to consider the long-term future. This is where you guys are unprofessional. Wang Lu smiled and didn't explain much. But soon, the girls understood the significance of Wang Lu's step. After accepting Wang Lu's man-made spiritual roots and personally experiencing the feeling of cultivation, the women of Peach Garden Village regarded Wang Lu as a celestial being and prostrated themselves in worship. In this mood, the village head, Yanzi, decided to offer the biggest secret of Peach Garden Village to Wang Lu. Benefactor's kindness to us is as heavy as a mountain, but it's a pity that we have no way to repay it. Our appearance cannot enter Benefactor's eyes, therefore. After thinking about it, we can only offer this thing to Benefactor, hope Benefactor can accept it. As the village head, Yanzi, devoutly knelt in front of Wang Lu, holding a broken slate with both hands. The surface was originally engraved with a mysterious pattern, but now, after years of weathering, the original appearance could not be seen. This is the array diagram that the ancestors of Peach Garden Village obtained by chance coincidence. Legend has it that it's the legacy left by the immortals in heaven. It's very brilliant that even ordinary people can use it. Because of this, we can barely survive under the oppression of the demons of Black Wind Mountain. Although this array diagram has been around for a long time and has lost most of its effectiveness, I think it might still be useful to Benefactor. After listening to Yanzi's explanation, Tian Daolan and the other girls revealed a dignified look. This array diagram was more than just useful. Perhaps the most important treasure in this level was it. An array that could be controlled by an ordinary person, which could resist the demons of Black Wind Mountain even after losing most of its power, was definitely a top-rank array in 9 regions. Even if it couldn't be said to be priceless, at the beginning of the exploration of the group of immortal tombs, such a treasure was still rare. For the disciples of Yin and Yang School, it was even more precious. Who knew that Wang Lu still shook his head? This array is passed down from generation to generation in your Peach Garden Village, and it's an important guarantee for survival and reproduction in the mountains. Although a lot of it has been corroded by the demons of Black Wind Mountain, if it's placed in the place where the feng shui lines converge, it can still be slowly restored. How could we take away such a treasure? Upon hearing this, Tian Daolan was dumbfounded. Wang Lu. What do you want to do? All the previous investment had been invested, but when it was time to harvest, Tian Daolan actually used all sorts of excuses. If she didn't know that Wang Lu had quite a few female confidants these years, Tian Daolan would have suspected that he really fell in love with this beautiful and mature Yanzi, so much so that the rumored smart and capable lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect became a good person. Of course, Wang Lu didn't want to be a good person. It was just that, with a map in his hand, he guessed that the structure of this immortal dreamland was more complicated than what the average person expected. Everyone knew that the more investment in the immortal dreamland, the more the harvest would be. The problem was, when was the investment counted, and when was the harvest counted? If they still foolishly invested when it was time to harvest, then they would lose everything. In Tian Daolan's view, as long as they beat back the Black Wind Mountain and helped the village to complete the reproduction, all the investment would be completed. However, Wang Lu felt that things were not that simple. Seeing that Wang Lu insisted on not accepting the map of the village, Yanzi was disappointed but also somewhat glad. This map was indeed important to Peach Garden Village. If it was really given away, the safety of the village would inevitably be threatened. It was just that, Peach Garden Village's kindness was as heavy as a mountain, which Peach Garden Village really had no way to repay. Live well, that's the best reward, Wang Lu lightly said, and then made his last investment. 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years, you guys have to seriously live and multiply, and let Peach Garden Village become the real master of this place. Hearing Wang Lu's encouragement, Yanzi was full of excitement. She kowtowed on the ground and said, "Benefactor's instruction, everyone in Peach Garden Village will bear it in mind. We have inherited the immortal method from Benefactor. Even if our aptitude is mediocre, we will work hard to live up to your expectations." With that, she suddenly put down the silk scarf that was wrapped around her head and respectfully handed it to Wang Lu. "Benefactor, this is a token left by the ancestors of Peach Garden Village. Although it has no magical effect, it is the token of the village head, and has been passed down from generation to generation. I offer this thing to you. In the future, if you have any orders, Peach Garden Village will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." Wang Lu was stunned for a moment, and then immediately nodded in appreciation. "You're really tactful. No wonder you can become the village head." For Wang Lu, going through water and treading on fire for a mere Peach Garden Village was actually worthless. However, by saying so, Yanzi promised to multiply and grow Peach Garden Village until they were qualified to be dispatched by their benefactor. This was the future of Peach Garden Village, which was very valuable. After all, Yanzi didn't know that she was just a fictional character in the immortal dreamland. The weight of this promise was much heavier than the offering of the battle map. However, after Wang Lu nodded, he was also puzzled. What should he do next? Based on the map in his hand, he faintly guessed that the harvest of Peach Garden Village should be more than just an ancient array. However, rationally speaking, how much magical content could the prelude to the 36 chains, which was suitable for cultivators below the level of King Pill? That ancient array was already a pleasant surprise, because it seemed to be close to the level of spiritual treasure. If the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall restored it to its original state, it would not be a problem for it to become a low-rank spiritual treasure. When the King Pill level Cheong Hua first entered the group of immortal tombs, she only obtained a few low-rank magical treasures. Comparatively speaking, Wang Lu's harvest was already very amazing. Moreover, Peach Garden Village had already offered the future of the village to him. What else could they offer? Rationally speaking, when Yanzi presented the map, he should have stopped at the right time. It was just that Wang Lu very resolutely chose to gamble. Now it seemed that the harvest time should have come, but he still couldn't find the right place to start. Could it be that his judgment was really wrong? Just as Wang Lu was considering the timely adjustment of the strategy, he suddenly heard the exclamation of a girl in his ear. "Isn't this the heavenly silk headscarf?" Immediately afterward, the girls of Yin and Yang school exclaimed one after another, "It's true. It's exactly the same as the one in the album. It's indeed the most precious heavenly silk headscarf that has been lost for many years. But how could it be here? I remember that Master taught me that the heavenly silk headscarf is an important part of the feather clothing. Not only it has a magical effect, it's also an important keepsake of the sect. It's just that it was lost a long time ago and has never been recovered. But why would it be lost here?" Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was also surprised. This group of immortal tombs was different from the Golden King's treasure house. He had never heard that it could collect all the lost treasures in the world. As a matter of fact, its principle was to generate treasures in the immortal dreamland. If this silk headscarf was accidentally obtained by the ancestors of Yin and Yang school in the immortal dreamland, then that would make sense. But now, the cause and effect relationship was obviously reversed. No matter how he thought about it, Wang Lu still couldn't figure it out. He simply took the silk headscarf and seriously asked, "Take a closer look. Is this really the treasure of your Yin and Yang school?" However, just as Wang Lu reached out and touched the silk headscarf, time seemed to stand still. Everything around him was completely still. The village girl Yanzi, the flying petals in the peach garden village, and the festive spring breeze were all still. Only the group of outsiders were still looking around in confusion. The next moment, time resumed its flow, but the speed of the flow was thousands of times accelerated. Wang Lu and the others seemed to be separated. They could only watch everything change rapidly in front of them, as if they were outsiders who were isolated from the world. They saw that Peach Garden Village, with the support of Wang Lu and the others, quickly got on the right track. The methods left behind by Yin and Yang school were passed on to everyone in the village, and Wang Lu's artificial spirit root had trained the first group of cultivators in the village. Among them, the fastest one was the village girl Yanzi. She had an extraordinary perception. Originally, she was the one who controlled the ancient array with her mortal body. After obtaining the artificial spirit root, she worked even harder. Coupled with the rich spiritual energy and good feng shui in this place, with her mere 9 Yin spirit root, she impressively broke through the king pill stage after 100 years. At this time, Peach Garden Village had become a pivotal force in the mountains. After 100 years of reproduction, the population of Peach Garden Village, which originally only had a few hundred households, had increased more than 10 times. And among them, there was no lack of people with natural spirit root. In this mountain range, the probability of birth of spirit root seemed to be far higher than in 9 regions. When he saw this, Wang Lu's complexion changed dramatically. He suddenly stood up and revealed an incredulous look. This is impossible." Tian Dao Lan and the others didn't see through it. They just guessed that Wang Lu's reaction meant that this fast-forward plot was equivalent to the end of the plot. The 4 of them accompanied Wang Lu all the way. But in the end, they ended up with nothing? Then, Wang Lu suffered such a setback, so his heart should be very uncomfortable. If they took advantage of this, they didn't know if they could get what they wanted. And just at this time, Tian Dao Lan also discovered the problem. She also stood up in disbelief, gently covered her small mouth, and exclaimed, "Oh my God, that's the Yin and Yang armillary sphere." The several junior sisters looked at the place where Peach Garden Village used to be. The village girl Yanzi, who was now a Taoist master of King Pill stage, was solemnly refining a dozens of meters tall behemoth. And from the appearance, it was 80 to 90% similar to the peak spiritual treasure of Yin and Yang school, the Yin and Yang armillary sphere. Although the thing refined by Taoist master of King Pill was far from being comparable to the current Yin and Yang armillary sphere, this was clearly the prototype of the genuine armillary sphere. Why is it here?" While speaking, even Li Qingzi, who was the slowest to react, had guessed what was happening in front of her. The girl's eyes widened and her mouth opened wide. Under extreme shock, her mind went blank. The next moment, the river of time suddenly slowed down. In Peach Garden Village, Yanzi wiped the sweat on her forehead with a happy face and looked at the behemoth in front of her with gratification. "From today onwards, we will truly have our own sect, our own foundation." Beside her, several younger female cultivators curiously asked, "Sister Yanzi, are we going to establish a sect? Peach Garden School?" Yanzi shook her head. Our peach garden village can have today, all thanks to the gift from benefactor 100 years ago. Even if we have some achievements today, we must not forget the source of all this. The cultivation method taught by benefactor is named Yin and Yang, and all our achievements today are also based on this, so let's call it Yin and Yang School. Crash. As her voice fell, the immortal dreamland was also broken into countless pieces. Cherry said, "Maybe everything is an illusion. It's all fake. How can things in the immortal dreamland be taken seriously?" Li Qingzi pointed to the silk scarf in Wang Lu's hand and said, "Is the silk scarf also fake?" Ying Tao was suddenly at a loss for words. The silk scarf in Wang Lu's hand was the biggest contradiction. If everything was an illusion, then this silk scarf was the claw that tore the illusion and revealed the bloody reality. Seeing the several Yin and Yang school disciples quarreling non-stop, Wang Lu shook his head and said, "Right now, you guys can't get any result even if you keep quarreling. It's better to take this silk scarf back to your sect and ask your elders to identify its authenticity. In this way, the truth of the matter can come to light." Tiandao Lon was stunned. "But this silk scarf is," Wang Lu interrupted. "Previously, when you asked for the body fusion, you could ask for such a high and mighty thing. So why are you so bashful now? This silk scarf is far more important to you than to me, and I am a professional, so it's easy for me to get through several immortal dreamlands to get the treasure. You guys may not have such a chance. Moreover, you guys are acquainted with my master, so this silk scarf is my gift to you. Take it." Seeing Wang Lu's sincerity, Tiandao Lon gratefully took the silk scarf. She wanted to open her mouth to express her gratitude, but she felt that no matter what she said, it would be a bit pale and powerless. However, the passion in her heart seemed to be overflowing. The next moment, the girl was hot-headed. Unexpectedly, she leaned over and kissed Wang Lu's cheek. Wang Lu was slightly startled. He could have dodged or blocked it, but in the end, he calmed himself down. Because his knowledge as the top student of Spirit Sword Sect told him that for these passionate girls of Yin and Yang School, dual cultivation with another person might be considered as nothing, but kissing on the cheek had another meaning. Similarly, it was natural to refuse their body fusion, but refusing to kiss on the cheek was somewhat hurtful. "Next, we may have to go back to the sect as soon as possible." Tiandao Lon endured the shyness in her heart and said to Wang Lu, "Such a big thing has happened. We must report it to the sect elders as soon as possible. So next." Wang Lu waved his hand. "Next, I don't need you guys anymore. Just go back with peace of mind." After saying goodbye to Tiandao Lon and the others, Wang Lu fell into contemplation in the group of immortal tombs. After passing through the Peach Garden Village, in addition to the silk scarf, Wang Lu also got a few pieces of glittering and translucent fragments. It was when he witnessed Yanzi becoming the founder of the Yin and Yang School, the immortal dreamland was broken, and the immortal dream fragment naturally fell into his hands. In Wang Lu's view, this was probably the clearance certificate of the 36 chains. Only with this certificate could he continue to go deeper into the chain. The reason why the sect elders sent him to attack the immortal dreamland was for these fragments. As for the harvest in the immortal dreamland, no one actually cared about it. As a matter of fact, in this chain of Peach Garden Village, Wang Lu almost completely ignored the existence of the spoils of war. In the previous 2 battles with the demons of Blackwind Mountain, the spoils of war were actually all over the mountains and valleys. However, he really didn't put them in his eyes. What good things could there be in a group of mobs? It was just that, later on, the plot twist was so fast that Wang Lu didn't expect it. When Yanzi announced the establishment of Yin and Yang School, even Wang Lu felt that his mind went blank for a moment. Of course, unlike Tiandao Lon and the others, Wang Lu's mind went blank because he thought of too many things at that moment. With the map of the group of immortal tombs in his hand, his understanding of this place was no less than anyone else in the world. Before this, he only knew that there might be a great secret hidden in the group of immortal tombs. However, he never thought that just as he reached the periphery, he would already be involved in the line of cause and effect. However, when it came to the line of cause and effect, there were actually many things that didn't make sense. For example, the simplest question. If it wasn't for Wang Lu's blood tide that brought Tiandao Lon and the other girls to Peach Garden Village, how could there be any subsequent development? Of course, if one traced back to the source of history, it could be traced back to a small coincidence. However, was all of this really a coincidence? His master sent Tiandao Lon and the others to his side. Did she already see the secret of the group of immortal tombs? Or was it just an unintentional move? If his master had already seen the clue, did it mean that the other elders of Heavenly Sword Hall also knew about it? Yet, they actually jointly concealed it from him? This also didn't make sense, because they had no reason to conceal it. If they didn't trust him, they could have just sent someone else to do it. The difficulty in Peach Garden Village was nothing more than how to deal with the village girls. If the elders already knew about the follow-up development, dealing with the village girls would not be difficult at all. As long as they found an expert who could deal with the first 2 rings of demons and monsters, it would be enough. And this point could be easily done by Lu Li and Zhu Shiyao, and they were much easier to control than him. After eliminating this reason, Wang Lu fell into a deeper confusion. That scene just now, Wang Lu didn't think that anyone could predict it in advance. Even the previously triumphant Qiong Hua and the Shangjing sect behind her didn't explore to such a deep point. Perhaps what he experienced was the responsibility that he had to shoulder when the door of the group of immortal tombs opened. However, was the responsibility that he needed to shoulder to meet the needs of the entire Yin and Yang school? Isn't that a bit too difficult for me? Let alone the establishment of Yin and Yang school was more than 10,000 years ago. After such a long time, it was unrealistic to expect the future generations to be responsible for the previous oath. At least, as a Supreme of Unity stage, the leader of Yin and Yang school had tens of thousands of cultivators and a huge foundation. Would he, a mere peak shoot-on stage cultivator, give in to his demand? If she was that stupid, perhaps she wouldn't be able to become the leader of a top-rank sect. As a matter of fact, although the heavenly silk headscarf seemed beautiful, it also had a big hidden danger. The so-called great kindness was like enmity. Wang Lu had helped the establishment of Yin and Yang school, so this enmity might be absolutely irreconcilable. Let alone Wang Lu actually had no need for the Yin and Yang school, which was coveted by countless people. Thus, he simply gave the heavenly silk headscarf to Tiandao Lan to bring back to Yin and Yang school. As for how the Yin and Yang school would respond, it was up to them. Whether they would be deeply grateful or pretend not to see it, it didn't matter. However, thinking to this, Wang Lu's mind suddenly flashed, and his thoughts completely diverted to unrelated things. He was the one who obtained the heavenly silk headscarf, so it was reasonable to say that it was his personal loot. However, after the immortal dreamland ended, he handed over the headscarf to Tiandao Lan without the slightest hindrance. It was reasonable to say that the loot in the immortal dreamland could not be handed over to others at will. However, this heavenly silk headscarf was not subject to this restriction. Was it because the headscarf itself was special, or because they had made a contribution that could not be ignored, thus they were eligible to share it? Unfortunately, there was too little information about the group strategy, so it was difficult for Wang Lu to come to a definite conclusion. Prior to this, although the group of immortal tombs had been explored for a year, the group strategy was still a minority. Because compared to the difficulty brought by the increase of the number of people, the enhancement of the team strength was secondary. For Wang Lu to be able to smoothly clear the instance with 4 people, first, Peach Garden Village did not emphasize fighting, and second, Wang Lu's strength was much higher than his peers, which could not be regarded as the norm. However, thinking to this point, Wang Lu had a new idea. Since the loot in the immortal dreamland might have a sharing mechanism, then as an expert in this field, it seemed to be a very promising thing for him to lead the newcomers. Unfortunately, there was no opportunity to put it into practice at present, so he could only leave it for later. Right now, Wang Lu could not wait to experience the content of the next chain. He must explore the secret of the messy cause and effect lines in this group of immortal tombs. Thinking to this, Wang Lu decided not to go back to the mountain, but to directly enter the next chain. In any case, in terms of the difficulty of this 36 chains, the best pioneer for the next chain could only be himself. Thereupon, Wang Lu directly picked up the fragment of the immortal dream and locked the entrance to the next chain in the resplendent river of stars. However, just as Wang Lu entered the next chain of the immortal dreamland, before he had the time to observe the surroundings, he felt a whistling sword wind in front of him, and then a pitch-black heavy sword came straight at him. What the hell? Is this the rhythm of opening the fog to catch me? Chapter 381. Whoosh! The black heavy sword brought with it a terrifying whistling sound of the wind, and for a moment, it felt as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on him. However, just when Wang Lu was surprised that this immortal dreamland ignored the foreplay and went straight to the climax, he also found out that the power of this slash was not as strong as it seemed. Although the power of the heavy sword was astonishing, It did not contain any extraordinary magical power, and the sword momentum was not fast enough to make people unable to react. It was completely at the mortal world level. For a mortal world sword, Wang Lu did not even need to use his non-phase method to block it. He did not dodge nor evade, letting the edge of the heavy sword fall on top of his head. With a loud clang sound, the heavy sword broke from the middle, and not even a white mark was left on his forehead. Peak Shoot-on Stage Cultivator's physical strength was already very powerful, and it was difficult for mortal world weapons to harm them, let alone a Peak Shoot-on Stage Cultivator like Wang Lu. After blocking this sword, Wang Lu realized that he was not ambushed, because even if the ambusher was stupid, it was impossible to ambush a Shoot-on Stage Cultivator with a mortal world sword. At least, it should be a heavy catapult or a barrel of gunpowder. Right now, it was purely the immortal dreamland that played a bad joke on him, throwing him directly into a slaughterhouse. The so-called slaughterhouse was not a rhetorical device, but a simple and straightforward description. At the moment when the heavy sword fell, Wang Lu's eyes swept around and clearly saw his location. It should be a small mountain village near the city. It was not large, but it was quite rich. The village buildings were exquisite and beautiful, and the village roads were paved with neat stone slabs. However, this rich and prosperous small mountain village was now bathed in blood and fire. Everywhere in the village, there were villagers who died horrible deaths. Every one of them had their stomachs cut open and their internal organs minced into pieces. A team of heavily armed soldiers was scattered throughout the village, carrying out the massacre in an orderly manner. At the moment when the heavy sword fell, Wang Lu saw with his own eyes that 2 soldiers pierced a girl with a spear and cut open her chest with a dagger. In front of him stood a person who was obviously the captain. He wore leather armor that was of a higher grade than the average soldier. His weapons were also a heavy sword and a short sword for close combat. The captain slashed with his heavy sword, but his weapon was broken by Wang Lu. The joints in his arms were also broken, and his expression showed a trace of pain and determination. The soldiers who committed murder in the village were all ordinary people. With Wang Lu's current strength, he could wipe them all out in an instant. However, out of the caution of a professional, he did not rush to make a move, because what they saw might not be real. It looked like a cruel massacre, but who knew the cause and effect? Perhaps there was an even greater bloodshed hidden behind the prosperity of this village. For example, these villagers were secretly manufacturing drugs and causing endless harm. Perhaps they were secretly forming a cult. Perhaps they were a transfer station for human trafficking. The immortal dreamland did not give him any buffer time and threw him into the slaughterhouse. Perhaps it was to induce him to make a wrong judgment. Similar situations had occasionally happened in the group of immortal tombs over the past year, and Wang Lu had heard about it. The group of immortal tombs tested the cultivators in all aspects, and the setting of the difficult problem was often different from person to person. For example, sometimes people who were good at fighting but not good at thinking would encounter a complicated problem in the plot, which gave them a headache. Sometimes it was the other way around. If the cultivator had confidence in his fighting ability, then the immortal dreamland would arrange a powerful opponent for him, which was exactly what the cultivator wanted. However, many cultivators who were good at thinking would be deliberately targeted by the immortal dreamland. Some confusing scenes were deliberately set up to make them make a wrong judgment. Cleverness could be the victim of cleverness. For example, in this scene, perhaps the soldiers who were wantonly slaughtering symbolized the righteous side. If he wiped them all out without any explanation, then he could only associate himself with the evil villagers. However, if he did nothing, perhaps he would miss the opportunity to save people. Among the survivors in the village, there might be key characters who triggered the plot. Once they were killed, the plot could not continue. Therefore, it was inevitable that he would make a move, but his position must be subtle. Fortunately, now he had a reason to make a move. After entering the immortal dreamland, the heavy sword that came at him seemed to be a gift from the immortal dreamland to him. All of you stop. Wang Lu lightly opened his mouth and then spread out his non-phase sword qi, which enveloped everything within a radius of 300 meters. The soldiers who were committing the murder suddenly felt as if there was a mountain on their body, and they fell to the ground one after another. However, the range of influence of Wang Lu's non-phase sword qi was limited to this. Most of the places in the village could not be covered, and it was difficult to stop the massacre of the soldiers. However, there were many things that did not need to be done personally. Through the way the soldiers looked at the captain in the eyes, as well as the order of their previous massacre, Wang Lu guessed that the captain should have considerable authority. Thus, He decided to start with the captain in front of him. "Tell them to stop or I will kill you." The captain's face changed. "Your Excellency is..." Before he could finish his words, Wang Lu had already kicked him in the knee. "You don't have the qualification to ask me questions. Pointing your sword at me is a sin that can't be redeemed even if you die 10,000 times. I will not take your life for the time being, which is a rare kindness and generosity. Don't make me lose my patience." The captain sneered, seemingly dismissive. However, when Wang Lu, with an even colder look in his eyes, urged his mind collapse technique, the resolute captain's willpower immediately collapsed. "Stop, all of you stop." With the captain's order, the soldiers in the village stopped one after another. Amidst the painful groans of the remaining villagers, they quietly waited for the next step. Wang Lu coldly asked, Why do you want to kill people?" The captain was stunned. Of course, there was a reason for the massacre here, but it was not convenient to say it out loud. Because of the effect of the mind collapse technique, the captain did not have the ability to directly resist. Therefore, he wanted to mumble something to cover it up, but just as he was about to do so, his other knee was kicked off. At the same time, a stronger spell further disintegrated his will, causing him, who had always been accustomed to pain, to wail and roll on the ground. Then, without Wang Lu's urging, the captain told everything in full detail. "We are the subordinates of King Yunyang. His Highness King Yunyang let us come here to collect the 10,000 spirit blood." 10,000 spirit blood? Wang Lu was surprised to hear this word here. The 10,000 spirit blood should refer to the blood of 10,000 kinds of creatures. In this village, besides the people, there were only a few domestic animals. So where did the 10,000 spirit blood come from? Moreover, the 10,000 spirit blood was usually a catalyst for refining evil weapons. As the king of the mortal world, what did he need the 10,000 spirit blood for? But before that, there were several more important questions to ask. King Yunyang, for his own selfishness, indiscriminately killed the innocent. According to your customs, is it justified or not? In the 9 regions, there were many mortal countries where the ruler had the power to kill the common people. Let alone slaughtering a village, they could even slaughter a city. However, with the establishment of the Wanxian League and the popularization of the righteous path, this kind of behavior has disappeared. However, Wang Lu was in the immortal dreamland, so who knew what the customs were here? If the massacre of the village was the local custom, then there was no need for Wang Lu to make a fuss about it. However, when asked by Wang Lu, the captain was obviously tongue-tied. This, Wang Lu smiled. Then it seems that there is no justification. That King Yunyang is most likely a tyrant. His Highness is by no means a tyrant. The captain, whose knees were completely broken and whose will was destroyed by 2 rounds of spells, actually had the courage to resist at this time. His Highness is benevolent, wise and mighty, by no means a tyrant. You can kill me and torture me, but I will never allow you to insult the reputation of His Highness. Wang Lu smiled. I insult his reputation? What a joke. You killed innocent people here and committed an unforgivable crime. Did I instruct you to do it? Isn't it because of your King Yunyang, for his own selfishness, tarnishing his own reputation? What does it have to do with me? Nonsense, you're talking nonsense. Wang Lu said, in any case, since I've seen it, I can't ignore it. Where does your King Yunyang live? Over there. Wang Lu said and pointed to a bustling place in the distance. The scope of this immortal dreamland could not be endless, the area was limited. The so-called King Yunyang's territory should not be large. Based on the aura observation method, there was only one place nearby that could become the capital city. The captain clenched his teeth and refused to answer. However, when Wang Lu pointed to the distance, his eyes could not help but change a little. Observing this change, Wang Lu knew that his guess was right. It seems that I'm right. Humph, such a tyrannical and heaven-defying king, I can conveniently get rid of him and accumulate some merit points for me. With that, Wang Lu summoned the sword of Mount Kuan and prepared to fly into the sky to find trouble with King Yunyang. Although the captain was immortal, he also had some vision. He knew that if he really let Wang Lu go, His Highness King Yunyang was likely to encounter great danger. Therefore, he clenched his teeth and said, Your Highness, His Highness has a hidden trouble that is hard to say. He does not intend to do evil. Hidden trouble? Wang Lu asked. In order to strengthen his sexual vigor, he slaughtered the people, Is this not called intentional evil? Is your country worshipping reproduction? With that, he no longer paid attention to the dumbfounded captain, stepped on his flying sword, and flew straight to Yunyang City. Half an hour later, Wang Lu appeared in the bustling Yunyang City. As a mortal country, Yunyang City was huge. The city was prosperous and rich, and the traffic was endless. The atmosphere in the city was harmonious and orderly, and the people lived and worked in peace and contentment. It was a scene of great governance. TSK, looking at this scene, it is really hard to believe that King Yunyang is a tyrannical king. Especially since this place is full of people. It shows that the king here is absolutely a wise king. But how could a wise king let his men kill innocent people? It's hard to say. Could it be that a disharmonious sexual life has such a big impact on a person? With a trace of curiosity, Wang Lu entered the largest mansion in the city, which was the residence of King Yunyang. With the cultivation base of a Shudan stage cultivator, sneaking into the residence of a mortal king was as easy as turning one's hand. However, just as he entered, he heard a dispute. "Father, you don't have to persuade me. I will never agree with the 10,000 spirit blood. I would rather die than have that evil life-saving elixir. Don't make me hate you. I'd rather you hate me for the rest of your life than watch my daughter die." Chapter 382. After hiding in King Yunyang's mansion for half a day, Wang Lu had roughly figured out the ins and outs of the matter. To put it simply, about 3 months ago, King Yunyang's beloved daughter, Princess Yunyue, suddenly fell ill with a strange disease. She was bedridden and looked haggard and weak day by day. King Yunyang searched everywhere for famous doctors, but they were all helpless. In the end, he even invited some charlatans to his mansion to diagnose the princess. Charlatans were naturally unreliable. However, one day, a wandering Taoist priest floated in and, with a dose of medicine, opened the eyes of the unconscious princess. King Yunyang was overjoyed, but that wandering Taoist priest said that his decoction could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. The princess was suffering from a strange disease that could only be cured by using the 10,000 spirit blood as a catalyst. However, the 10,000 spirit blood was an incomparably mystical refining material. To collect the blood of tens of thousands of rare birds and beasts, this process would take several years or even decades. Some of the rare beasts might even be extinct, but the princess disease could only be delayed for 3 months at most. In 3 months, let alone the 10,000 spirit blood, even the second-level 10,000 spirit blood could not be refined. Therefore, the wandering Taoist priest proposed an alternative, which was to refine the blood of human beings, the leader of the 10,000 spirits. Although this was an evil method, it was the only method that could be effective in a short period of time. Moreover, the human blood did not need to kill thousands of people, it only needed the blood of hundreds or thousands of people to complete the refining. After leaving behind the method to refine the 10,000 spirit blood and the prescription to save the princess, the wandering Taoist priest floated away. King Yunyang suffered in pain for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days later, with bloodshot eyes, he made a decision. He sent his most trusted team of death warriors to a remote mountain village and asked them to quietly collect the 10,000 spirit blood within 1 month. For this, they must do it at all costs. As a benevolent and generous king, King Yunyang was actually willing to kill his own people to satisfy his own selfishness, which shocked his death warriors. However, since they were death warriors, they would not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire, let alone deal with some mountain villagers. Moreover, Princess Yunyue was the successor of King Yunyang. For the sake of this independent country in the mountains, they must do their best. After sending out the death warriors, King Yunyang felt relieved and aged a lot. However, when he went to his daughter's room to visit, he found his daughter angrily asking him why he had to do such a cruel thing. Although he did not know where the news was leaked, King Yunyang could only face everything and confess his thoughts to his daughter. Although King Yunyang was the king of a country, the bloodline of the Wang family was cursed, and in his generation, it had almost withered away. Yunyang and his beloved wife died of a sudden illness, leaving behind only the young Yunyue and Yunyue and Yunyue and Yunyue. The continuation of the royal bloodline had already met with great difficulties, but at this time, Yunyue herself had fallen. As the king of a country, it was impossible for King Yunyang to sit idly by and watch his only heir die. Therefore, he actually had no other choice. Not to mention, he had his own reasons for killing his own people. Although he could not say it out loud to outsiders, when his daughter questioned him, he could no longer hide it. Do you know why you and your mother fell ill one after another? Princess Yunue lowered her head and said softly, perhaps mother and I are not blessed enough, so, not enough karma? King Yunyang angrily said, I have worked hard all my life to make the country prosperous and strong, and the people live and work in peace and contentment. If there is really a God who can decide a person's fortune, then my King Yunyang family can afford to have a great fortune. With that, King Yunyang suppressed his anger and explained, the upper immortal who saved you has found out the cause of your and your mother's illness. Everything is because of that Yunwu tea. Cloud mist tea? Princess Yunue repeated softly, but she did not seem very surprised. King Yunyang gritted his teeth and said, it is the so-called immortal tea that Fog Origin Mountain routinely offers every year. They said that the tea is not only fragrant, but also has a special nourishing effect on women, prolonging their life, preserving their beauty. But they never mentioned that the cloud mist tea is like a poison to the women of the royal family. You and your mother fell ill because of it. They not only killed your mother, they also want to kill you. How can I forgive them? Princess Yunue smiled and said, Father, you are just looking for an excuse for yourself. They are just ordinary villagers. How could they know that the cloud mist tea is harmful to the royal family? Their ancestors have lived in the mountain village for generations. When they drink the tea, they only see the benefits and never see the harm, so they are just ignorant. But the enthusiasm of presenting this treasure should not be wronged. If you want to say that it is wrong, it is the fault of our royal family. Nonsense. King Yunyang wanted to get angry, but in front of his daughter, he could not get angry. He could only flick his sleeves and leave, thinking that once the 10,000 spirit blood was refined and his daughter was cured, he would no longer care about other things. However, Princess Yunue was particularly stubborn. After arguing with her father once, she refused to drink water or rice, and was determined to die. When King Yunyang came to find them in a flustered and exasperated manner, the conversation that Wang Lu happened to hear happened. Well, so far, the background of this palace story has been explained clearly. Next, the palace locking Yunue operation will officially begin. After watching enough bitter palace drama in the palace, Wang Lu seriously deduced and decided to solve the problem in an above-board manner. Therefore, he straightforwardly flew out of the palace on his flying sword, and then went to the front door, ready to knock. Naturally, he was stopped by the guards. When asked about his identity, Wang Lu pretended to have the demeanor of an immortal and said, I see that the evil aura here has condensed, and there is a faint bloody light. I am afraid that in recent days, there has been a disaster. I have come here to dispel the disaster and dispel the doubts of the people in the palace. If it was an ordinary person who said this, perhaps the loyal guard would cut off his head on the spot. However, when Wang Lu stepped on his flying sword and slowly descended from mid-air, no matter how bold and loyal the guard was, he didn't dare to be ostentatious in front of him. He hastily sent a message to King Yunyang. And after the wandering Taoist priest, King Yunyang attached great importance to this kind of person who obviously had immortal method. Hearing that there was a person who had arrived, he quickly went out to greet him. May I ask who immortal is? Wang Lu thought for a moment and told the truth. I am the lead disciple of the Lingzhen school, Wang Lu. Now I am traveling outside in the name of my master. I happen to see the evil aura condensing in the palace. I am afraid that a great danger is about to break out, so I have come to help. King Yunyang frowned and said, I don't know what the great danger that immortal is talking about is. Wang Lu said with a smile, at present, it's not a big danger. It should just be a small trouble lurking in the prince's mansion. Most likely, some people in the prince's mansion suddenly suffered from an acute illness, or suddenly encountered a dangerous situation. However, if we ignore it, there will be endless troubles in the future. I can see that there are signs of evil aura erupting here. It should mean that many years ago, there was a danger, but it was suppressed by the people here, so it did not lead to a great disaster. However, if the root is not eliminated, sooner or later, the danger will erupt. Hearing Wang Lu's words, King Yunyang's whole body trembled. He felt that this immortal really knew how to calculate and know everything. Then what should we do? Wang Lu said, let me know the details first before I can make a decision. For this kind of danger where natural and man-made disasters collude, rashly intervening will only be counterproductive. We must peel off the danger layer by layer like spinning silk from a cocoon. Only then can we ensure safety. Looking at your tired face, There is a hint of worry in your eyes. Could it be that the outbreak of this danger is entrusted to someone close to His Highness? Then you might as well take me to see that person directly. Hearing this, King Yunyang could not wait any longer. He quickly invited Wang Lu into the palace and saw the sleeping Princess Yunyue. When he saw Princess Yunyue, Wang Lu was taken aback. Previously, when he was lurking in the palace, in order to avoid being discovered, he only heard her voice and did not see her. He felt that the princess was indeed worthy of being a nobleman. With a sweet voice, she should be a first-class beauty. Unexpectedly, after seeing her, is this your daughter? He's not a visitor from some planet. Princess Yunyue, who was lying on the sickbed, did she look like a beautiful woman? The girl looked haggard, most of her black hair had fallen off, revealing her pale scalp. Her face was gray and thin, her cheekbones were high, her eyes protruded, and her lips were dark purple. Let alone a beauty, she did not even look like a human. King Yunyang was in extreme pain. Yunyue, she, of course, did not look like this before. However, because of an acute illness, in just half a month, she has become like this. The beautiful girl that he was looking forward to turned into an alien beauty. Wang Lu was quite disappointed. However, seeing Yunyue like this, he became more serious. King Yunyang, this is not a strange illness, this is clearly a strange poison. Who would be so sick that their facial bones would soften and deform? King Yunyang said, Immortal is really omniscient. Yunyue is indeed suffering from a strange poison. With that, King Yunyang asked his men to bring the Yunwu tea and give it to Wang Lu. Seeing the tea, Wang Lu was surprised again. Are you sick? You dare to drink this thing? This is King carrion grass, okay? Carrion grass. Just hearing this name, King Yunyang felt pain in his heart. Carrion grass. What a vicious existence. Yes, it is a kind of spirit grass that grows on carrion corpses. It is harmless to mortals, but it is highly poisonous to cultivators. You are born as the children of the royal family, enjoying the worship of thousands of people, and the nourishment of spiritual veins. You already have extraordinary qualifications. But your daughter's talent is better than yours. If she cultivates the path of immortality, she will certainly have some achievements in the future. However, being placed here is tantamount to being poisoned even deeper. This is really fate. At this point Wang Lu sighed. The toxicity of this carrion grass is not strong for cultivators, but Princess Yunyue is not an orthodox cultivator and has no cultivation base. Moreover, now that the poison has entered her vitals, if she wants to live, it will indeed be a bit troublesome. May I ask, Immortal, do you have a way to save her? Wang Lu said, I have two plans. The bottom plan is to collect the blood of 10,000 spirits to refine elixirs to cure the poison. But the blood of 10,000 spirits is extremely difficult to collect. If you want to refine it into elixirs before the princess dies, you have to take an unconventional approach. But that is a wicked move that will cause endless troubles. King Yunyang trembled and did not dare to speak. The top plan is that I will use elixirs to prolong her life for 1 year. During this 1 year, you should find someone to give birth to a child with her as soon as possible, so that your Yunyang royal family can reproduce. What? That's right. We're looking for a prince consort. We're looking for someone with a strong body and outstanding intelligence to mate with the princess and give birth to outstanding descendants. Even if the princess dies, your royal bloodline will continue. Isn't that good? Chapter 383. Looking at your face, it seems you have some objection to my best plan? Seeing King Yunyang's livid face, Wang Lu was not surprised and said, Yes, although this method can work in theory, in order to ensure that the princess can give birth to a child in just 1 year, she must frequently have intercourse with other people. Coupled with her weak physique, it is very difficult for her to conceive, and under the effect of my life-saving elixir, it is even worse. Therefore, if she wants to successfully conceive, she must do it day and night, without stopping for even a moment. I can understand your disgust as a father who loves his daughter deeply. This matter is indeed contrary to common sense. If you find it difficult to accept, I am not surprised. King Yunyang was silent for a long time, and then asked in a hoarse voice, If I do that, after Yunyue gives birth to a child, what will happen? Wang Lu said, Naturally she will die, and she may not even wait for a year. The pain of childbirth alone is enough to take her life, but for the royal family, this is nothing. How could it be nothing? King Yunyang growled, "She is my only family. After giving birth to a child, it will not be. Just take it easy." Wang Lu lightly said, "Or, do you really want to try the 10,000 spirit blood?" King Yunyang's whole body trembled. He felt that the young cultivator in front of him seemed to have seen through all his secrets. "Supreme Immortal, I have." Wang Lu smiled and said, "Actually, you have sent people to collect the 10,000 spirit blood?" With these words, King Yunyang unexpectedly felt that his legs were a bit weak. It was true that he was the sovereign of a country, but in front of an immortal cultivator, a sovereign was no different than an ant. If this cultivator wanted to promote good and punish evil, then he'd. In fact, when I travel around the world, I have always disliked dealing with mortal emperors. This time, when I saw the atrocities on Fog Spring Mountain, I followed the clues and found this place. However, unexpectedly, the evil aura here is no less than that on Fog Spring Mountain. Therefore, I thought that perhaps there is something hidden. In fact, I have been waiting for you to admit this matter, to see if you are worthy of my help. In the end, although you hesitated, you finally had the courage to reveal the truth in front of me. In return, I will temporarily not pursue your sin of slaughtering civilians." Just as King Yunyang was relieved and somewhat at a loss, Wang Lu's face sank. "King Yunyang, who taught you to collect the 10,000 spirit blood?" "Yes, it was a wandering Taoist." "Wandering Taoist?" Wang Lu sneered. "Using 10,000 spirit blood as medicine to treat the carrion grass, even if it's me, if I didn't know it beforehand, I wouldn't be able to think of it in a short time. A wandering Taoist has a good idea." "King Yunyang, what else did he leave here? Let me have a look." If Wang Lu had asked King Yunyang for something as soon as he entered the door, King Yunyang would inevitably hesitate. After all, the wandering Taoist had established his prestige first. However, after several rounds of tricks, Wang Lu had faintly established a higher prestige than the wandering Taoist, which made King Yunyang more inclined to believe him. Therefore, for the sake of his daughter's life, King Yunyang disregarded the wandering Taoist's previous entrustment and told the whole story in full detail, and then gave the prescription left by the Taoist to Wang Lu. Wang Lu looked at the prescription, and his complexion gradually became dignified. King Yunyang was worried and quickly asked, "Is there any problem with this prescription?" Wang Lu said, "There is no problem with the prescription, it is even quite brilliant. The problem is the piece of paper that contains the prescription." "This piece of paper?" King Yunyang doubtfully said, "This is the paper he took from my study, could it be it?" "He has cast a spell on the paper. Do you still need to ask such a simple reason?" Wang Lu somewhat impatiently pinched the prescription paper. "Everything within 100 feet of this paper, that Taoist can see it in panoramic view. At the same time, he has attached a trace of his primordial spirit to it, and when needed, he can turn it into an incarnation. If, like you said, he left the prescription and floated away, no longer being contaminated by the cause and effect of this place, how do you explain this paper?" Wang Lu said, sneered, and then ignited the prescription paper in his hand, turning it into ashes. "Although there is not enough evidence, but after guessing the next step several times in a row, I think I have understood the whole picture of the matter." King Yunyang impatiently asked, "Please enlighten me, Supreme Immortal." "I repeat, at present, I do not have reliable evidence. All of this is just my personal speculation. First of all, the carrion grass is not a simple spirit grass. It must grow on the corpse of a superior spirit creature, and it must be cultivated with a special method. If it wants to form naturally, it must be from an auspicious beast. And with your small cloud country, there is no such good karma to get the remains of an auspicious beast." King Yunyang said in amazement, "You mean this carrion grass is artificially cultivated? Then, do you think the civilians on the Mist Spring Mountain know how to cultivate carrion grass?" Wang Lu's smile became even colder. "Even if I cultivate this carrion grass, it will take a lot of time. As for those mortal methods, it is even more nonsense." King Yunyang was, after all, the king of a country. He quickly thought of the following content, and his face gradually turned pale. Wang Lu said, "The villagers on the Mist Spring Mountain could only have accidentally found this kind of spirit grass. But to think of making tea with this spirit grass and offering it to the royal family, this is not necessarily natural. It is very likely that someone instigated this, and the instigator is likely to be the person who cultivated the carrion grass. Unfortunately, the The people on the Mist Spring Mountain have been killed by your personal guards, so it is impossible to get any clues. Of course, even if you do not make a move, I believe that the person who laid this trap should have used a spell to eliminate his traces, needless to say. In short, this rotten corpse grass was purposely sent into your hands by someone with ulterior motives, and your reaction was all within his calculations. King Yunyang said, "Immortal, are you suspecting that wandering Taoist priest?" Just the right time, just the right time. How can there be so many coincidences in this world? But why would he do this? I am just a mortal emperor. What benefit can he get from doing this? The benefit is that it can make you go against the grain, ruin the country, and plunge the people into misery and suffering. Today you can slaughter a village for the 10,000 spirit blood, and tomorrow you can slaughter a city, and then the world will be in chaos. Your royal bloodline has withered, and as long as you die, there will be no more peaceful days in the Cloud Country. At that time, many demons and devils will wreak havoc, which is only natural. And pain and sin are precisely the best nourishment for some cultivators. Today you slaughter a village to refine the 10,000 spirit blood, then in the future, when the flames of war spread everywhere, someone can take the opportunity to refine 1,000,000 spirit blood, and the tens of millions of corpses of your Cloud Country can be refined into a powerful corpse soldier. Moreover, your Cloud Country is currently prosperous and the people are at peace, and its providence is thick. If the country can be overturned in a short period of time, the lost providence will be the best nourishment for cultivators. King Yunyang said with a wry smile, "With the means of immortal, if you want to destroy my Cloud Country, I'm afraid it will be as easy as flipping your hand. Why do you need to go through so many twists and turns?" Wang Lu said, "Yes, if the immortal cultivators have the intention to do evil, the power of the mortal world is very difficult to resist, but because of this, the cultivators are very vigilant. If someone bullies the weak and does evil, he will be attacked by a group of people. And under the joint efforts of the righteous cultivators, any devil will be annihilated. However, on the other hand, if the people of the mortal world are in chaos, then even if they kill people, we will not intervene too much. The path of immortals and mortals are different. This is the fundamental law of cultivators." King Yunyang was silent for a long time, and then nodded with difficulty, accepting Wang Lu's explanation. "However, no matter how much I say, it's just my personal guess. Next, let's invite the other party to come out and meet us," Wang Lu said, stretched out his foot, and stepped on the ashes of the prescription paper on the ground. Suddenly, an angry voice sounded. "Who is this expert? Breaking my spell is fine, but you dare to trace back to the source and hurt my primordial spirit?" While speaking, the pile of black powder was wrapped by an invisible force, like a cloud of mist, rose up and formed a strange face. "Oh, it turns out to be a Shudon Stage Junior. When your master let you go out to gain experience, didn't he teach you that some people can be provoked and some people can't?" As the black face opened its mouth to speak, an invisible wave spread out in the room. King Yunyang was hit by the wave and silently fell down. As for the sleeping Yunyue, her breathing slowed down a bit. However, when the invisible wave touched Wang Lu, it was as if it was cut by countless sharp swords, fragmented. The black face let out a muffled groan, revealing a slightly painful expression. "So it turns out that you have a protective magic treasure from your sect. No wonder you're so insolent. Brat, on account of your sect, I'll overlook your offense this time. If you leave the Yun Nation now, I can still save your life. Otherwise, bring it on, idiot." Wang Lu's light words made the black face speechless. A moment later, the face gradually changed from astonishment to anger and malevolence. "Reckless thing. Do you know who my master is?" Wang Lu sighed and said, "Although I don't know who your master is, I know that you are just a domestic dog. Heh, I thought that by eliminating you, I could end this part of the plot. It seems like I have to go through more twists and turns. I have to tear down your ancestral tablets. Really troublesome." When the black face heard this, it was startled and then laughed wildly. However, as soon as it laughed, it was suppressed by the non-phase sword chi and completely disappeared. At this point, the room was once again quiet. Wang Lu was silent for a while, replaying the whole thing in his mind, and in his heart, he had a general judgment. This part should be a part that emphasized fighting. Because from the beginning of the plot to the present, it was almost a one-way plot. In the Fog Spring Mountain, when they saw King Yunyang's soldiers massacring the village, normal people would stop them and ask the leader for the reason of the massacre. After learning about the 10,000 spirit blood, it was logical to chase them to the King Yunyang's mansion. Then, It was no suspense to learn about the existence of the traveling Taoist priest. After that, it was to eliminate the evil and defend the Tao. This was nothing more than a matter of speed. For someone like Wang Lu who was good at strategy, he almost did not take a detour and directly found the traveling Taoist priest. If it was an ordinary person, perhaps there would be some twists and turns in the middle. If he encountered a particularly stupid person, perhaps he could directly kill King Yunyang and settle the account, and the traveling Taoist priest would always hide behind the scenes. But the possibility was not very big. Emphasis on fighting. Judging from the situation just now, the strength of the domestic dog should be at the low-grade king pill level, but the depth of its master was somewhat unpredictable. However, it's just a solo dungeon, how difficult can it be? Speaking to this, Wang Lu's eyes slightly shifted and saw the unconscious Princess Yunyue on the sickbed, and could not help but laugh. This time, I have the support of an alien teammate. Chapter 384. As a professional, Wang Lu was more inclined to take the initiative to attack in the immortal dreamland. After finding the trace of the wandering Taoist priest in the Yunyang mansion, although there was no further clue, Wang Lu quickly found his real body. Because now that he understood his intention, which was to induce King Yunyang to become a tyrant, he deduced that there were only a few places where he should be at this time. And among these few places, the royal tomb was undoubtedly the first choice. Dozens of generations of kings of the Yun country were buried here, and together they guarded this beautiful and prosperous country after their death. And the ancient monument that symbolized the destiny of the Yun country stood in front of the royal tomb. Once the country changed, it would bear the brunt. When Wang Lu arrived at the royal tomb, he had already discovered the change. The soldiers who guarded this place were obviously affected by the spell. Each and every one of them was pale and stiff, and without exception, they maintained an old-fashioned look. In reality, as the troops guarding the royal mausoleum, they were the elite troops carefully selected by the kingdom. They were determined and loyal, and they knew very well what their responsibilities were. When they came here, they had already treated themselves as dead people. At the same time, living near the royal tomb for a long time had inevitably contaminated these soldiers with a bit of death aura. Such an army was the most stable and the most terrible. Even the team sent by King Yunyang to slaughter the village could not be compared with the army guarding the royal tomb. However, in the eyes of cultivators, the fighting strength of mortals was not important at all. What was important was that these troops were simply excellent material for corpse soldiers. With Wang Lu's eyesight, he could clearly see that they had been hit by a high-level spell, and although the traces of the spell contamination were deliberately hidden, it could not be hidden from Wang Lu's eyes. At this time, they were still alive and had not been refined into corpse soldiers. However, he was afraid that it would not take long. Now that they were almost in a critical state, as long as the caster gave the command, they could quickly complete the transformation between life and death. And through this point, it could be seen that the wandering Taoist priest had basically completed all the preparatory work. It could be said that everything was ready except for the east wind. If he had not interfered, the destruction of the Yun country would only be a matter of time. At this point, the other party would definitely not be willing to give up just like that. Thus, even if they saw that he was a disciple of a famous sect, they would not back down and insist on fighting to the death. As expected, when Wang Lu truly stepped into the boundaries of the royal mausoleum, a sinister voice rang out beside his ear. I've long known that disciples of prestigious sects like you love to be in the limelight. You think that just because you have a high cultivation base and a magical treasure to protect you, you can move unhindered in the world. You especially like to slay demons. It's as if the cultivators of the evil sects and devil sects are fish on the chopping board, ready to be slaughtered by you. The voice was erratic, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, but the malice in the tone was overflowing like a tide. But you don't know that in our eyes, aren't you righteous Tao cultivators the same? When I first started cultivating, I heard enough stories of geniuses slaughtering idiots from the righteous path. In fact, over the years, countless righteous cultivators have died in our hands. 20 years ago, I personally captured a female cultivator who had just entered the King Pill realm and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Can you guess how I dealt with her? Wang Lu originally didn't care about this mysterious voice, but when he heard this, he laughed. Idiot, showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. Do you know who you're showing off your insignificant skills in front of? While speaking, he finally locked on the opponent's position and threw the sword of Mount Kuen. Although the strength was not great, The sword momentum was as fast as lightning, flying toward the tallest building in the royal mausoleum, which was the ancient monument of Yun country. The ancient monument of Yun country was the most precious treasure of the country, and its majesty was even above King Yunyang, the living king. No one could blaspheme it in the slightest. However, at this time, a black-clothed man with a stooped figure stepped on the ancient monument without any respect. In the face of the flying sword attack, he strangely laughed, waved his hand, and released several ghost fires, which collided with the sword of Mount Kuen. The ghost flame was a malicious spirit nefarious flame that he'd refined by chance, and it was filled with corrosive energy. If it were to strike a person's body, it would instantly transform the person into poisonous pus, and if it were to strike a magic treasure, it would contaminate the might of the magic treasure, causing it to be greatly damaged. These two ghost fires were the weapons used by the evil cultivators to deal with righteous cultivators. 20 years ago, the righteous female cultivator he captured was defeated because she was caught off guard and her protective magical treasure was polluted by the ghost fires. This evil cultivator could see that Wang Lu's magical treasure was powerful. Although he didn't know that it had reached the level of spiritual treasure, he could see that Wang Lu's flying sword was only fast, without any variation. It was simply a target that was delivered to his front door. In fact, Wang Lu's ability to control the flying sword to injure the enemy was indeed not strong. With his peak shoot-on stage cultivation, he could only barely control the flying sword to fly smoothly. In a battle of the same level, it could not be said to have any lethality. However, Wang Lu did not need to worry about controlling the flying sword. The sword of Mount Kuen was a spiritual treasure. The sword spirit Autumn Beam had been painstakingly cultivating for thousands of years, and in the ancient sword tomb, she also obtained a chance to break through the bottleneck. Now, even if she was separated from her master and acted independently, she still had a very strong mobility. Seeing the several ghost fires in front of her, she directly turned around and went around them, continuing to rush toward the evil cultivator in black. The evil cultivator was shocked. The ghost fires he released seemed to be casual, but in fact, they were carefully calculated to perfectly block the flying sword's path. However, he didn't expect that the flying sword would turn around in the air, and with incredible agility, it directly drew a few arcs, bypassed the ghost fires, and directly arrived in front of him. Being approached by the flying sword, the evil cultivator finally panicked. Compared to the righteous cultivators, the means of these evil cultivators were more strange and varied, but in a fair fight, they were not the opponent. Although his cultivation was obviously higher than the opponent, in a fair fight, he did not have much chance of winning. The stories of righteous cultivators killing evil cultivators were not just legends. Not to mention that this flying sword was so strange and definitely not an ordinary object. If he was hit by it, it was inevitable that his soul would fly away and scatter. Therefore, he fiercely clenched his teeth, waved his hand, and released a wall of fire that was more than 10 feet high and 40 to 50 feet wide. This wall of fire seemed inconspicuous, but it was actually all the ghost fires he had accumulated at this time. Releasing it all at once was somewhat of a gamble. In this fight, from the first move, he had fallen into a disadvantageous position. If he could not turn the tables as soon as possible, he would be continuously suppressed by the opponent, and it was very likely that he would be defeated. Righteous cultivators liked this kind of suppressive fighting style the most. After all, they were better at frontal combat techniques. The evil cultivator, on the other hand, was good at winning by surprise, and this wall of fire was his capital to turn the tables. If the opponent wanted to hit the wall of fire head-on, even a legendary spiritual treasure would be greatly damaged. And if the magical treasure was damaged, it would inevitably bring disaster to its master. When the time came, he would have the opportunity to reverse the situation. However, the development of things was once again beyond his control. Just as he released the wall of ghost fires, he felt a blur in front of him. That simple, heavy, but incredibly sensitive flying sword suddenly turned into a young man wearing a red and white robe. The young man was not afraid of the power of the ghost fires and directly reached out to touch the wall of ghost fires. Before the evil cultivator had the time to rejoice that he had encountered an opponent who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, he saw that the ghost fires in front of him were erratic, and then suddenly rushed toward him, as if they were overwhelmed by an irresistible force. This change was too fast. The evil cultivator was stunned as he was surrounded by the ghost fires. Then he used 3 spells in succession, but he still couldn't stop the ghost fires from approaching him. Finally, he watched in despair as he was swallowed by the ghost fires, and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a pool of pus. After using the non-phase nameless sword to rebound the damage of the ghost fires, Wang Lu took a deep breath and calmed down the shock in his jade mansion. Just now, he was unprepared to take the full blow of a king pill-level evil cultivator, which was really not a good feeling. Of course, if it were a shoot-on-stage disciple from a common sect, it would not only be a bad feeling, but also be directly burned by the ghost fires. Even if they died 10 times, they would still be alive. However, Wang Lu didn't feel that there was anything to be proud of. After all, he just killed a dog, and the real master was still behind him, which would undoubtedly be a bitter fight. Against a dog, Wang Lu could use a crushing method to deal with the opponent in 2 or 3 moves. However, if it was replaced by an evil cultivator elder whose cultivation base was far above him and who was good at using a strange pervasive method, Wang Lu must be cautious in dealing with him. Thinking of this, Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh with emotion. This immortal dreamland was indeed a place that emphasized fighting. Just this black-clothed evil cultivator alone was equivalent to the Peach Garden Village in the Upper Ring, which was composed of thousands of monsters and demons. The Peach Garden Village was a 5-person team, while the Cloud Country was a solo team. While he was thinking, Wang Lu suddenly felt a shake under his feet, as if something was about to break out of the ground. He sneered and stepped down. He felt as if there was a volcanic crater under his feet that was about to erupt. An irresistible huge force gushed up, and he couldn't resist it. However, Wang Lu refused to retreat even half a step. He took a deep breath and operated all the magical power in his body. Under the command of the Emperor Bone, the 206 non-phase sword bones shone with a vigorous luster, while the simple and heavy sword of Mount Kuan steadily pointed at his feet. Wang Lu's most proficient 3-feet sword defense was launched, which abruptly pushed back the volcanic crater under his feet. The next moment, 100 feet in front of him, a thick tentacle broke out of the ground and soared into the sky. The tip of the tentacle was badly mutilated, and poisonous pus and blood fell like raindrops. It seemed that the injury was not light. At the same time, a gloomy voice floated in the air. "Good kid, this move, motionless like a mountain, is really something. Unfortunately, you're still too inexperienced." While speaking, the ground trembled one after another. 1, 2, a total of 10 blood-red tentacles broke out of the ground. The tentacles stretched straight into the air and swayed back and forth. Just now, Wang Lu found it a bit difficult to resist one tentacle. If all 10 tentacles came out at the same time, it would simply be a dead end for him. However, seeing this scene, Wang Lu actually calmed down. A corpse driver who drives corpse beasts? Judging from the shape of the tentacles, it's a hybrid of an ancient giant earthworm, right? Unfortunately, the giant earthworm is of such a high grade, but its corpse has been refined by you into such a nondescript thing. It seems like you're at the peak of King Pill, right? TSK, I thought I would encounter a Yuanying stage opponent, but in the end, you're just a small fry. The corpse driver sinisterly smiled and said, "Why would I need Yuanying stage to deal with a kid who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth like you? Peak of King Pill is more than enough." That's right, there are many powerful people in this world. There are indeed a lot of King Pill that can easily crush me, but unfortunately, none of them are as useless as you. Chapter 385. Bickering with Wang Lu was really a stupid thing to do. Perhaps he might not be the #1 scolding person in the world, but there was only 1 in 100 who could scold better than him. At least, the corpse driver who drove the giant corpse bug in the immortal dreamland could only talk to Wang Lu for a few words before he felt his evil fire rising and could not say anything more. Without talking, the only thing left to do was to fight. 10 tentacles swooped down from mid-air, as if Mount Tai was pressing down, wanting to crush the tiny young cultivator into powder. Wang Lu calmly withdrew the sword of Mount Kuan in his hand, and the vigorous non-phase sword Qi also became more condensed and solid. The 3-feet sword defense was the distance that Wang Lu was most proficient in, which strengthened his defensive power and defensive range. However, below the 3-feet sword defense, every time the sword defense shrank by a bit, the defensive strength could be increased by a bit. It was just that this kind of defensive posture was very passive, and there was no flexibility to speak of. However, in the face of a heavy and powerful opponent, Wang Lu did not need any flexibility. As long as his defensive power climbed to the extreme, the next moment would be the time to witness a miracle. 10 tentacles fell from the sky. The corpse driver who drove the corpse bug was surprised to find that Wang Lu did not evade and let the tentacles bombard his body. The kid was dead. The first reaction of the corpse driver was to check his body to see if he could find a few good magical weapons in his mustard seed bag. However, he soon found that things were not as expected. From the feeling of the tentacles, the young man's resistance was unusually tenacious. Of course, this was not unusual. Righteous cultivators, especially this kind of elite disciple, would always have a life-saving magical weapon left by their sect. Moreover, the power of his 10 tentacles was not really 10 times that of a single tentacle. Because the tentacles were too large, when the attack was concentrated, only 1 or 2 tentacles could actually touch Wang Lu. The rest of the tentacles were only used to block Wang Lu's dodging. It was not surprising that Wang Lu could withstand the first round of bombardment, nor was it worth his attention. Because the 10 tentacles could continuously bombard him for 100 rounds without getting tired. However, the corpse driver believed that no matter how powerful a magical treasure that could be driven by a shoot-on-stage disciple was, it was impossible for it to continuously withstand 100 rounds of bombardment. The gap between peak king pill and peak shoot-on-stage was not so easy to cross. Out of caution, the corpse herder did not get too close. Just now, he had seen with his own eyes how his servant had died tragically. That young man had a magical flying sword and a spell that allowed him to teleport to the side of the flying sword, as well as an invincible magic weapon for close combat. A low-rank King Pill servant died just like that. If it were him, who was at the peak King Pill stage, he would not necessarily be able to do it. Therefore, when the 10 tentacles came out and continuously bombarded him, only 2 were really used to attack, while the other 8 were used to block his flying sword. The corpse driver thought that his formation was perfect. In fact, Wang Lu was indeed trapped in the tentacles array. However, he soon found that the giant insect corpse that he was proud of could not do anything to the young sword cultivator. The other party simply put his sword in front of him. Thus, a sword defense with a radius of more than 2 feet, which could not even completely wrap around Wang Lu, was like an indestructible fortress, isolating all the attacks outside. Once, twice, 100 times, 200 times. Even when the 10 tentacles took turns to attack, it was difficult to recover the damage caused by the collision. However, Wang Lu's sword defense still stood firm. His breathing was steady and long, and his expression was at ease, without the slightest trace of embarrassment. The corpse driver could not believe his eyes. Was this guy really just a peak shoot-on-stage cultivator? How could there be such a powerful peak shoot-on-stage cultivator in this world? Being bombarded by the hill-like ancient giant insect corpse, even a cultivator with the cultivation of King Pill stage would have his body shaken, and his jade mansion would collapse. However, he was safe and sound. Moreover, it seemed that he did not rely on magical treasures, but purely on his own powerful cultivation method. After hundreds of bombardments, in theory, even a mountain would collapse and disintegrate. However, Wang Lu stood there with his sword, and even the ground under his feet did not sink a bit. The impact of the giant tentacles was completely absorbed and resolved by him. This kind of perfect and invincible defensive sword was unheard of, and even appalling. The corpse driver hesitated for a moment and decided not to entangle with him. Although up to now, he was the main attacker, and the other side was the main defender. He was afraid that a long night would bring many dreams. He did not want to compete with this unusually strong boy in endurance. Moreover, the long battle just now had alarmed many people. Although the army guarding the mausoleum had all been turned into corpse soldiers by him with a command, so that the news would not leak out, there were still some civilians around the royal mausoleum who heard the sound and found the abnormality. It was impossible for the insect driver to slaughter everyone within a radius of 100 miles, and once the matter here was discovered, the righteous cultivators would come to slay the demon, and he would be in trouble. The Cloud Kingdom's mausoleum was not a good battlefield. If it were not for the strange death of his servant, he did not want to expose his strength here. Fortunately, he had done most of the things that should be done. Even if he abandoned this royal mausoleum, his plan could still continue. Young man, be proud of your momentary luck, but I have remembered your smell and your magical power. From today on, you will never have a peaceful day. Whenever night falls, when you close your eyes to meditate, you have to be careful that my baby will quietly bite your throat. Hearing this sentence, Wang Lu's complexion really changed. Of course, he was not worried about the threat of the corpse driver. First, in order to break through the King Pill realm, Wang Lu's non-phase method had already reached a small stage of perfection. His protective magical power was always protecting him, so a sneak attack was meaningless. Second, this corpse driver was just a puppet in the immortal dreamland, so a long-term threat was simply a joke. However, Wang Lu could hear that the corpse driver had now retreated, and if he retreated, where could he find him? And if he could not find him, how could he get rid of him to smoothly pass this stage? Wang Lu did not intend to waste too much time on this ring. However, just when Wang Lu felt a headache, a dull and angry voice surged in the royal mausoleum. "Who dares disturb my sleep?" The sound wave swept across, and Wang Lu's complexion changed. Because just now, his jade mansion and immortal heart involuntarily trembled along with that voice, and with his current stage, this was almost impossible. The next moment, without much thought, Wang Lu heard a scream. Just now, the corpse driver seemed to have seen an inconceivable horror, and suffered great pain and torture. "No, no." After these two simple words, the corpse driver became silent, and the tentacle cage that trapped Wang Lu suddenly went berserk. The 10 tentacles fiercely pulled away from him and shrank into the ground, as if they were escaping from some prehistoric beast. Unfortunately, their movements were still a bit slow. "Filthy evil creatures! How dare you appear in my territory?" The 10 tentacles that completely suppressed Wang Lu in a defensive posture suddenly shook in mid-air, as if they were swept by an invisible force. Soon, the surface of the tentacles was stained with a layer of gray color, and their swift movements became sluggish. After a moment, fine sand and gravel fell from the tentacles, and then the whole tentacle disintegrated, turning into broken stones. Wang Lu was shocked. The ancient giant earthworm hybrid corpse insects, any one of them had the strength comparable to a cultivator of the King Pill realm, but they were actually silently turned into stone, their vitality exhausted. Who was that angry voice in the royal mausoleum? Easily crushing a cultivator of the peak of the King Pill realm. How strong was this guy? Was this really an immortal dreamland for a Shudon cultivator to gain experience? Did the array responsible for generating the immortal dreamland accidentally use the wrong script? No matter how confident Wang Lu was, he realized that this sudden voice was by no means an opponent that he could contend with, so he immediately wanted to withdraw. Unfortunately, he was still a few steps late. Just as he took a step, a terrifying aura fell from the sky. Wang Lu felt as if his jade mansion and immortal heart were frozen, and all the magical power in his body did not listen to him. "Are you the one who woke me up?" Obviously, there was nothing else around the sound, but that sound exploded in Wang Lu's ear out of thin air. Wang Lu tried his best to resist it with his non-phase sword qi, but his ear still inevitably bled. In the face of this terrifying voice, Wang Lu, while suppressing the turbulence in his body and jade mansion, ran his mind at full speed to think of countermeasures. He clenched his teeth and asked, "Who are you?" "Me. I am the master of this land. You are standing in my territory, but you don't know who I am?" While speaking, the terrifying fluctuation was getting closer and closer. Wang Lu felt that every bone in his body was trembling. If it was an ordinary Shudon cultivator, under this roar, his bones and flesh would immediately dissipate, and he would die a miserable death. Relying on his non-phase ability, Wang Lu was barely able to withstand it, but that was all he could do. "I am just a cultivator passing by this place. Do I need to know who you are?" "A cultivator passing by this place?" Wang Lu's answer did not arouse a stronger anger. Instead, it made the voice fall into doubt. "Just passing by?" While speaking, Wang Lu felt that the pressure around him began to ease. The voice seemed to seriously examine Wang Lu. "Since you are an outsider, why did you come to my royal forbidden area?" At that time, Wang Lu's heart jumped. "My royal forbidden area? What exactly is the background of this guy?" His mouth truthfully replied, "I came to get rid of the evil for the people." Thereupon, he told the ins and outs of the matter in full detail, without the slightest concealment or distortion. After the story was finished, the mysterious voice fell into a long silence. Wang Lu thought for a moment and tried to say goodbye. "Now that the chief evil has been eliminated, if there is nothing else, I am ready to leave." "The chief evil has been eliminated?" The voice asked coldly. "Your so-called chief evil refers to him?" With that, a stooped gnome broke out of the ground and was suspended in mid-air by an invisible force. The gnome was unconscious and covered in blood. In mid-air, through the bloodstains, One could barely see that his appearance was extremely ugly and stinky. Before Wang Lu could nod, he heard the voice say again, "Your so-called chief evil who plotted to usurp the throne and tried to overthrow the country refers to my direct bloodline? The real master of the Yun country?" Wang Lu was shocked. What the F***CK? What kind of development is this? Chapter 386. You're saying that this dwarf is your direct descendant and the true master of the Yun nation? In other words, what the dull voice said was actually a very simple reasoning, but the conclusion of the reasoning was really shocking. Even with Wang Lu's vast experience and knowledge, his thoughts were somewhat stuck at this point. In other words, you're the founding ancestor of the Yun nation, the ancestor of the royal family? Then the Yun nation is actually not a simple mortal country. Oh, this is also very normal. There are indeed many great cultivators in the world who have no hope of breaking through. When their lifespans are about to run out and they see that their bloodline is unable to inherit the path of cultivation, they leave their sex and establish a regime in the mortal world. As long as they don't strongly interfere with the operation of the mortal world and don't abuse immortal techniques, generally, no one will stop them. Then, this ugly dwarf is your direct descendant, but now he intends to destroy the people of the Yun nation. This is probably because he suffered some grievances in the past and is bent on taking revenge on society, right? This is also reasonable. There is no harm in making a bold guess. Perhaps this dwarf is the ruler of the Yun nation in accordance with the laws and regulations. Unfortunately, his deformed dwarf origin made him inferior to his brothers of the same generation. Thus, he suffered a crushing defeat in the palace coup and was even persecuted. Then, he luckily did not die, resulting in today's scene. Wang Lu slowly voiced out his guess. The unconscious dwarf in mid-air suddenly quivered and regained consciousness. He sneered a few times and said, "That's right, your guess is completely correct. If I wasn't born with a disability, the throne of the Yun nation would have long been mine. In terms of poetry, literature, politics, and practical management, I'm far better than my useless younger brother in any of them. But just because he was born with a good appearance, he suppressed me in every aspect. In the end, he even broke my legs and forced me out of the palace. A dignified prince of the Yun nation had to struggle to survive like a beggar." Wang Lu said, "But now that you're a cultivator at the peak of the king pill, why are you so fixated on the gains and losses of the past?" That's right, a change in strength will bring about a change in outlook. Before I was lucky enough to have a fortuitous encounter, I cherished every blade of grass and every tree in the Yun nation because they were all treasures that belonged to me. However, after I set foot on the path of immortality, I realized how childish I was before. Compared to the freedom of cultivation, the little bit of profit that I conspired in the palace was not even worth mentioning. The king of the Yun nation may look impressive, but in the eyes of immortal Dao cultivators, the so-called king of the Yun nation can be killed with a single sword strike. Wang Lu asked, "Since you have this awareness, why don't you let go of the past?" Let go of the past? Do you know what supported me to survive in my darkest moments of despair? Do you know what supported me through the endless pain and torture when I first refined the corpse bug and used my own blood essence to nurture the death chi? Do you know what made my primordial spirit condense and not disperse when I failed to break through to the king pill and almost vanished into thin air? Wang Lu sighed. Hatred. That's right, it's hatred. After I cultivated the necromancy spell, my vitality continued to weaken and dissipate. I learned it without a teacher and purely cultivated with an incomplete book left by a predecessor. I don't know how many times I suffered chi deviation and almost vanished into thin air. It was the obsession in my primordial spirit that supported me to continue. When I succeeded in the foundation establishment stage, I could change my meridians and cleanse my marrow. When I achieved the king pill, I was reborn. However, I never replaced this ugly body of mine because I wanted to constantly remind myself that hatred is my source. I kept telling myself that everything I did now was to destroy everything that the usurper had one day. From the moment I was driven out of the palace, I never forgot my hatred for a day. And if I want revenge, the best way is to destroy this country. Although my brother is mediocre, he loves the Yun nation as much as I did in the past. Therefore, as long as I destroy the Yun nation in front of him, I can let him experience my pain. Oh, this is also a reason. However, the target of your hatred is only your younger brother. He is most likely dead now. At most, it will implicate his children. However, You are venting your anger on the entire Yun nation. The innocent people of the Yun nation have nothing to do with your palace grievances. The midget laughed. Nothing to do with it? Everything under the heavens belongs to the king. The entire Yun nation belongs to me. How I want to deal with it is all my freedom. As long as I can make the people I hate suffer, why should I care about other details? It was enough for Wang Lu to ask this much. In fact, he had no interest in the midget's grievances and hatred. He induced him to talk about these things for others to hear. Wang Lu turned his head and asked the oppressive voice that suppressed everything. Senior, you heard it. This direct descendant has admitted everything. If you want to clean up the house, you don't have to care about me. Just do it directly. With that, Wang Lu sighed, thinking, fortunately, I, a professional, am calm and composed, fearless in the face of danger. Otherwise, if I were to be impulsive and fight with this big killing machine head-on, even if I had 10 lives, it wouldn't be enough to die. The difficulty of this immortal dreamland was really against the heavens' will. A little bit of carelessness could cost one's life. Fortunately, I am the one who pioneered it. If it were someone else, they would most likely die here. Fortunately, the crisis had passed. This founding head of state who inexplicably woke up in the royal tomb was not an unreasonable devil. As long as he was willing to be reasonable, he would not be in any danger. Next, as long as he personally cleaned up the house, this ring should be over, right? However, just as Wang Lu felt relieved, he heard the founding head of state in the royal tomb sneer. The laughter was like a sharp blade, stabbing Wang Lu's whole body in pain and causing his jade mansion to tremble. Clean up the house? What a joke! Why would I want to clean up my direct descendant? A genius descendant who could cultivate to the peak of the king pill all by himself? Wang Lu was startled, and the expression on his face gradually stiffened. However, he still said, well, if you really like him, then do as you please. Abolish the current King Yunyang and replace him with this ruthless dwarf, destroying the national destiny that the Cloud Country has accumulated for thousands of years, is also your freedom. National destiny? That voice was even colder. Openly disobeying the rules that I set thousands of years ago and putting a usurper on the throne, the national destiny of this country should have been cursed. Now, I'm afraid the royal bloodline has withered. Wang Lu was surprised. What exactly was the position of the founding head of state of the Cloud Country? Did he still have a sense of right and wrong? How could he actually stand on the side of the dwarf? Moreover, he actually left a curse in his own bloodline? However, in King Yunyang's generation, only he and Princess Yunyue were left. This was indeed a bit strange. In an ordinary country, the royal family would only worry about the increasing population. If this was a curse left in the bloodline, it was reasonable. However, at this point, Wang Lu suddenly felt that he had nothing else to do. What could he do next? Are you rebelling? Immediately cooperate with the founding head of state and the ruthless dwarf to destroy the entire Cloud Country, and then kill King Yunyang and Princess Yunyue? I'm afraid this is not a good idea. But apart from this, what reason did he have to stand on the side of King Yunyang? From a moral point of view, King Yunyang was not a moral person. The massacre in Fog Spring Mountain was stopped, but hundreds of people were still killed. Not to mention that when King Yunyang's murderous intent arose, this sin could not be erased. From a legal point of view, King Yunyang's throne was not rightfully obtained. Although the root of the mistake was King Yunyang's father and even his ancestors, it was only right and proper for a son to pay his father's debt. Finally, from a strength point of view, King Yunyang was just a mortal. His opponent was a peak gold core stage cultivator and a senior old demon whose realm was unfathomable. There was no comparison at all. All in all, the best choice right now seemed to be to leave and let go of everything. However, it was also difficult for Wang Lu to accept this negative attitude. While hesitating, Wang Lu suddenly glanced at the ancient monument in front of the royal tomb, and his eyes narrowed. He saw that above the huge ancient monument, a large piece of the simple and heavy stone monument was disintegrated by a strong corrosive venom. The venom flowed down along the surface, corroding many of the ancient characters and patterns engraved on the ancient monument. So that's how it is. Wang Lu felt a flash of inspiration in his mind and vaguely guessed the direction of the current plot. This ancient monument, which was built at the same time as the Cloud Country, was probably not just a simple monument. Even the characters and patterns on the surface of the ancient monument were not for decorative purposes, but they were indeed useful. It was just that, after a long time, the significance of this ancient monument had been forgotten. Not surprisingly, the role of this ancient monument was not to suppress the fate of the country, but to suppress the founding head of the country. When he fought with the evil cultivator who stood on the ancient monument and released the ghost fire, it ended too quickly. He didn't even give the evil cultivator a chance to change his position before he was directly killed, turning him into a pool of pus. As a result, the pus corroded the ancient monument, and the dwarf lurked in the royal tomb and caused a lot of damage. In short, the old devil that should not have been released was released. This was the so-called hidden plot. If his progress was a little bit behind, such as not arriving at the royal tomb in the first place, or not killing the opponent in the first place in the battle, it would not trigger the appearance of the real manipulator behind the scenes. Unfortunately, once the manipulator behind the scenes appeared, the situation immediately took a turn for the worse. His martial strength, which should have crushed the whole audience, suddenly became vulnerable in front of the founding head of the country. The other party could make him on the verge of collapse with just a roar. The gap in strength was so big that it almost made him desperate. However, it was precisely because of this that Wang Lu was somewhat enlightened. Since he was invincible, there was no need to use force. There must be some tricks in this round, such as... Wang Lu cleared his throat. Senior, the bloodline of the Yun country's royal family has not withered. The dwarf sneered. Such a big royal family only has the father and daughter left. How is that not withered? And that daughter is about to die. Wang Lu also sneered. Yes, it was you who instructed your dog to specially poison her, turning a beautiful young girl into an alien. Unfortunately, she was originally the hope of the royal bloodline. Far better than a deformed trash like you. What did you say? Wang Lu lowered his voice and said word by word. You have been hiding in the depths of the royal tomb all these years, and you have not seen Princess Yunue with your own eyes, right? That child has the aptitude of a heavenly spirit root. What? Chapter 387. Princess Yunue had heavenly spiritual roots? Wang Lu's words caused the dwarf and his ancestor to exclaim in unison. The three words, heavenly spiritual roots, held great significance in the eyes of immortal cultivators. One had to know that those who possessed spiritual roots were 1 in 10,000 on the continent. Among all the spiritual roots, the heavenly spiritual root was 1 in 10,000. In many cases, the entire continent had not seen a true heavenly spiritual root for many years. Although this cultivator who had conquered the Yun nation was powerful, his aptitude could not have reached the level of heavenly spiritual roots. This was because if a cultivator with heavenly spiritual roots encountered a lifelong cultivation bottleneck, they would often be close to the soul formation stage or even higher. Just the angry roar of a soul formation cultivator with heavenly spiritual roots was something that Wang Lu could not withstand. From the looks of it, this ancestor should be at the nascent soul stage. Although he could not defeat him, it was not to the point where he could turn someone into ashes with a single breath. Simply put, heavenly spiritual roots were extremely valuable to this ancestor. The value of a descendant with heavenly spiritual roots was immeasurable. While the old ancestor was silent, the dwarf shouted, "That's impossible. She is merely the daughter of a usurper. How could she have heavenly spiritual roots?" Wang Lu laughed. "Why is it impossible? Could it be that you have grasped the pattern of the appearance of heavenly spiritual roots? If you say yes, then yes, and if you say no, then no?" The dwarf said, "My servant saw her with his own eyes, but he did not see any of the phenomena that a heavenly spiritual root should have. Possessors of heavenly spiritual roots often had special abilities from birth. For example, they could clearly see the fluctuations of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Some people could even spontaneously trigger the changes of the 5 elements, as if they were born with special abilities. However, Princess Yunue had never had these special abilities. In reality, it was impossible for Princess Yunue to have such abilities. Although she had aptitude for cultivation, it was not as strong as a heavenly spiritual root. Every word that Wang Lu had said was pure fiction. He was carrying out a soul-stirring adventure, a huge gamble. Through the previous conversation, he knew that the dwarf had not seen Yunue with his own eyes, and the ancestor also did not know the current situation of his descendants. Otherwise, he would not have said that the royal bloodline had already withered. Since these two did not understand Yunue's situation, he could act freely. Of course Princess Yunue would not show any abnormalities. For a princess who had lived in seclusion since childhood, innate abilities would not bring her any benefits. Instead, it would arouse suspicion. The ignorance of the mortal world made her afraid of her own power, and she was warned at a young age not to show her difference. She had to close the door tightly and not let anyone see or know. She could not do as she pleased. And after a long period of isolation, she was indeed able to retract all of her anomalies and act like an ordinary person. Although the dwarf was full of disbelief when he said this, he did not have any clear and strong evidence to refute it at this moment. The previous action was basically done by his servant, and many things were only known to him. Now that he had been beaten into a pool of pus by Wang Lu, there were many things that could not be testified by the dead. Wang Lu said, "For cultivators, whether the bloodline is orthodox or not is by no means determined by the rules of the mortal world. Heavenly spiritual roots are more orthodox than earthly spiritual roots, and earthly spiritual roots are more orthodox than the 5-element spiritual roots. This is the rule of cultivators. I believe that to Senior, a young and beautiful descendant with a heavenly spiritual root is far more useful than a useless descendant who can never get rid of his disability, right?" This was another gamble for Wang Lu. He gambled that the ancestor of Cloud Country was an out-and-out materialist. The so-called familial affection and bloodline were actually worthless to him. Otherwise, why would he, who had just been resuscitated after sleeping for so many years, have a preference for a deformed dwarf? It was because the dwarf was a cultivator, and a cultivator with a high level of cultivation. But this dwarf's talent was limited. The peak of the king pill was his limit, and he had no hope of breaking through. But a cultivator with heavenly spiritual roots was completely different. With the right guidance, the peak of the king pill was not the end. He could even reach a higher realm than he did in the beginning. Hearing the words heavenly spiritual roots, the voice fell silent. This made the dwarf very nervous, afraid that he would be abandoned by the ancestor. But the ancestor was not so easily fooled. Even so, how can you prove that what you said is true? How can you prove that Yunyue really has heavenly spiritual roots? Wang Lu said, "If you don't believe me, you can go to Yunyang City and see for yourself. If I'm lying, just kill me." After saying that, Wang Lu exhaled lightly and tried his best to calm the pressure in his heart. This was the last gamble, and also the one with the highest risk. He gambled that this founding ancestor of the Yun nation had not yet obtained complete freedom. Although he had great power in the royal mausoleum, he could not act as he wished, and it was even more impossible for him to run to Yunyang City to personally witness Yunyue's aptitude. This was because until now, the ancestor had not personally appeared. He only communicated with Wang Lu and the dwarf through a voice that appeared out of thin air. Even his power was invisible. This was not the reaction of someone who had slept for thousands of years. When a normal person woke up, they should stretch. Could it be that this ancestor had the habit of lazing around in bed? So Wang Lu gambled that no matter how extravagant his words were, this ancestor would not be able to see for himself whether it was true or false. In the end, he gambled right again. After a long silence, the voice said, "I give you 3 days to bring Yunyue to me." After saying that, a gray liquid flew out of the hole in the ground and pierced straight into Wang Lu's chest. Wang Lu did not block it and allowed the liquid to corrode his body. "Don't worry, she will be here within 3 days." After leaving the royal tomb, Wang Lu let out a long sigh of relief. 3 days was the buffer time he had bought for himself with his amazing speaking skills. The normal way to clear this hidden plot was certainly not like this. Unfortunately, in the first few rounds, he was indeed a bit too hasty. Some of the steps seemed to be slightly overdone, which led to things happening when he was caught off guard. And the sudden appearance of an unfathomable old demon that he simply could not fight against was a fatal mistake. Fortunately, there was still a chance to save it. The gray liquid in his chest was not a problem. The ancestor might think that the carrion water was a terrifying poison, enough to make any cultivator below King Pill tremble in fear and helpless. However, Wang Lu was very clear that with his current physical ability, he could easily suppress this poisonous liquid, and it would only take him a few days to digest and absorb it. If he returned to Spirit Sword Mountain, he could find any elder to help him resolve it in an instant. The problem was that he did not come to this immortal dreamland to seek survival. And as a professional, even if he accidentally triggered the hidden plot, which made the difficulty of this round suddenly increased, he still wanted to perfect the clear. 3 days was his buffer period. He believed that he would be able to find a way to clear the trial within these 3 days. The founding old demon was definitely not invincible. He must have a fatal weakness. For example, who was the one who built the monolith that suppressed the fate of the country? At present, the monolith could be said to be the only weakness exposed by the ancestor. Thus, if he wanted to clear the trial, he naturally had to start from there. Late at night, in the forbidden area of the royal palace, in the 1,000-year-old secret chamber of the royal palace, rows of neatly arranged stone and jade bookshelves reflected a faint light in the dim candlelight. Wang Lu stood among the bookshelves, holding the oldest book and carefully reading it word by word. So that's how it is. The founding king of the Cloud Country was indeed extraordinary. His name was Xueqi. He was a great cultivator from a famous and upright sect. In his later years, he returned to his hometown and established the Cloud Country in the Savage Land. The record ends here. There is almost nothing about Xueqi. This book is really useless. The Book of the King, which was regarded as the most precious treasure by the royal family of the Cloud Country, was thrown aside by Wang Lu as if it was trash. Then Wang Lu picked up another book, read it as fast as he could, and then continued to shake his head. In the ancient book that recorded the work of the sacrificial ceremony, even the 3 words Xueqi did not appear. Well, let's start with the construction of the royal tomb. After failing to find the correct answer in the 2 books, Wang Lu changed his train of thought and began to investigate the construction of the royal tomb. After all, according to legend, the oldest monolith appeared together with the construction of the royal tomb, so there might be some clues left behind. However, after reading 3 or 4 more books, Wang Lu still did not find any clues. The oldest monolith was like a god descending from the sky. In the ancient book, it appeared without any warning. Later on, the ancient book recorded how magnificent it was and pointed out its role in suppressing the fate of the country. But how did it appear? Who built it? There was no written record left behind. Reading until here, Wang Lu lost interest in the secret chamber of the royal palace. Obviously, someone deliberately deleted the record of the monolith. And since someone deleted it, Wang Lu believed that the books in this room would certainly not be missing anything. However, this did not mean that the clues were completely cut off. Even if the book did not record the secret of the fate of the country, Wang Lu believed that the royal family of the Cloud Country would certainly not be ignorant. Therefore, he directly went to find King Yunyang. National monolith? King Yunyang, who was lying on the bed, was not angry because of Wang Lu's intrusion late at night, nor did he ask why Wang Lu left without saying goodbye. Now he completely pinned the hope of his daughter's rescue on Wang Lu, so he would not refuse any request of Wang Lu. Regarding the national monolith, the royal family of the Cloud Country does indeed have a secret. Come with me. King Yunyang did not hesitate to get up and change his clothes. He led Wang Lu into the study, picked up a seal, pressed the side of the seal, and a jade scroll rolled out. This is the biggest secret of the royal family. Wang Lu smiled and said, "Is it in line with the rules to show me, an outsider?" King Yunyang said in a deep voice, "Now that the entire Cloud Country is overturning, what rule can be bigger than this country?" Well said. Wang Lu said and opened the scroll. With just a glance, his complexion changed. Chapter 388. The scroll inside the imperial seal, as the biggest secret of the Yun nation's royal family, did not disappoint Wang Lu. It indeed recorded information about the monolith. Moreover, it was what Wang Lu was most concerned about, the information about the builder of the monolith. The information was very detailed. Not only did it contain the identity of the builder, but it also roughly described the construction process. However, after reading this information, Wang Lu only had a series of curses in his mind. His mood was even worse than if he had not seen this information. Because the builder of the monolith was impressively Xueqi himself. How could there be such a ridiculous thing in this world? This was really preposterous. After all this hard work, using words to win 3 days of leeway, and then carefully investigating in the secret chamber of the royal palace, the final result was back to square one? No, this was simply worse than returning to square one. The information on this jade scroll not only did not answer the previous doubts in Wang Lu's heart, but instead created more doubts. What was Xueqi's purpose in doing this, that he did not hesitate to spend a lot of resources to build a monolith to suppress himself? Could it be that before his death, He had a sudden inspiration and came up with some kind of perverted way to suppress himself? With his bloodline and the frequent occurrence of perverted descendants, it was not impossible. While he was still puzzled, King Yunyang said, in addition to this scroll, the successive kings of the Yun nation seem to have a legend that the monolith in the royal tomb must not be destroyed. Otherwise, there will be a disaster that is enough to overturn the country. In fact, the so-called suppressing the fate of the country is actually derived from this legend. Although the meaning of the two is not too different. Wang Lu sneered inwardly. The difference is too big. Suppressing the fate of the country? That was basically superstition, like pasting the word fortune upside down, setting off firecrackers, and wearing red underwear. But if the monolith was suppressing an old monster that regarded everything in the country as floating soil, and had enough power to destroy the country, then that was truly terrifying. However, how could the great cultivator who cut his way through the thistles and thorns in the savage land become an old monster that could threaten the survival of the whole country? Moreover, according to the records, Yunkinjun at his peak was only at the peak of nascent soul realm at most. Using a secret technique, he could barely have the power of a deity transformation realm cultivator, and could be considered a pseudo-deity transformation realm cultivator. Generally speaking, the lifespan of a pseudo-soul formation cultivator was more than 1,000 years. However, he was already in his later years when he founded the Yun nation. More than 1,000 years later, his lifespan should have come to an end. At the very least, it shouldn't be able to jump around in the royal tomb. Wait a minute. In the royal tomb. Thinking of this, Wang Lu finally had a flash of inspiration. So that's how it is. It's not that he has a special longevity secret, but the Yunkinjun suppressed by the steel has already lost his humanity. Advancing from the nascent soul stage to the divine transformation stage was a very harsh test for a cultivator's Tao heart and primordial spirit. If a cultivator could not overcome this obstacle, it was very likely that his Tao heart would collapse under the influence of the heart devil, and his temperament would change drastically. He would then do something that would anger both men and gods, and then be attacked by a group of people and die without a burial place. And Yunkinjun might have suffered an internal injury when he was trying to break through to the divine transformation stage, causing the heart devil to grow. Later, although he was already nearing the end of his lifespan, he was afraid that the heart devil would take over his body and commit a heinous crime, so he built the steel to suppress himself. But how could it be that easy to suppress a divine transformation stage devil? Especially since the Yun nation was only a mortal nation. After Yunkinjun died, most of his descendants were mortals. Even if they had the aptitude to cultivate, they were only mediocre and far from the nascent soul stage. If Yunkinjun wanted to suppress himself, he would have to borrow some external force. Wang Lu continued to look at the scroll, connecting it with what he knew before. Finally, he found more clues from the hidden words. The steel that Yunkinjun built was indeed connected to the fate of the nation. He used the most brilliant method that he mastered when he was alive to control the feng shui of the Yun nation. Then, he connected it with the spiritual energy of the earth veins and transferred it into the steel, turning it into a suppressive force. In simple terms, if the Yun nation was peaceful and prosperous, then the suppression of the steel would be as stable as Mount Tai. But if the Yun nation's king lost his virtue, leading to the collapse of the nation, then the monster inside the steel might break out of the ground. Perhaps in Yunkinjun's view, a king who lost his virtue and his nation did not need to exist. In fact, for many great cultivators, dealing with mortal affairs was just that cold and ruthless. But in short, another puzzle in Wang Lu's mind was solved. How could a steel that was used to suppress a divine transformation stage devil, a steel that had stood for thousands of years, be corroded by a mere pool of pus? Because before this, King Yunyang's act of slaughtering the villagers of the Fog Spring village made him completely lose the virtue that a king should have, which immediately caused the steel to suffer a fundamental damage. The corpse-driving dwarf might not know about Yunkinjun, but his act of luring King Yunyang to lose his virtue was really a lucky hit. After thoroughly analyzing the current situation, Wang Lu suddenly felt that this was a fucking desperate situation. All the secrets had been solved, but there was no clue as to how to solve the problem. King Yunyang's loss of virtue was real, and the massacre on the Fog Spring Mountain had gradually had an impact. In this context, the damage to the steel was basically irreversible. Although it would not get worse in a short period of time, there was still a remnant of the binding force on Yunkinjun, which made it impossible for him to completely get rid of it, and without the constraint of the steel, Wang Lu simply could not do anything to a devil that was close to the divine transformation stage. After thinking about it, Wang Lu always felt that there was a blockage in front of him. There was a vague clue in his heart, but it was still vague. However, the difficulties encountered in this kind of reasoning were common, so Wang Lu was not in a hurry. After bidding farewell to King Yunyang, he strolled around the palace as if it was his own courtyard. There were still more than 2 days of buffer time, so there was no need to be in such a hurry. Not to mention that in this immortal dreamland, it did not matter if he failed the first time. Wang Lu was not arrogant enough to think that he was omnipotent. In any case, Aya was not by his side, so it did not matter if he lost once or twice. While thinking, Wang Lu unknowingly went to the palace of Princess Yunyue. Because of King Yunyang's previous request, the palace guards did not dare to stop him, allowing a grown man like him to enter the lady's boudoir. When Wang Lu returned to his senses, he had already arrived at the bedside of Princess Yunyue. When he saw the princess again, it was obviously late at night, but she was awake. Her pair of unusually big eyes were quietly watching him. "I'm going to die, right?" Under the corrosion of the poison, although the princess' appearance had degenerated to the point that she had lost the appearance of an ordinary person, her voice was still light and sweet, but now it seemed very weak. Wang Lu laughed in spite of himself. "Yes, you're going to die, but why do you sound happy?" Although Princess Yunyue was good at hiding her feelings, in front of a peak shoot-on stage cultivator, it was difficult to hide the true thoughts in her heart. Resuscitation, realizing that the vitality in her body was about to run out, Yunyue felt somewhat relieved. "Because if I die, father will not make the same mistake again." Yunyue smiled softly. "Father is actually a very kind and generous person, but when it comes to my mother and me, he is always prone to go to extremes. I know that this is not his fault, but I don't want him to make the same mistake again." Wang Lu asked with some surprise, "You have such a high level of awareness. At such a young age, you have already disregarded life and death. Little girl, you have a promising future." Yunyue's expression was somewhat gloomy. "How can I disregard life and death? Of course, I hope that I can live a long life, be healthy forever, and even be young and beautiful forever. But, if I can't control my emotions at this time, what will father do? He is under more pressure than I am, shouldering more arduous responsibilities, and I can't add more pressure to him." The more Wang Lu listened, the more surprised he became. The girl in front of him, who had become deformed under the erosion of the highly toxic poison, seemed to be faintly shining. "But the things I can do are still too little. I have tried my best to oppose the matter of the 10,000 spirit blood, but father still insists on going his own way, so I think that perhaps if I die like this, he can really be free." Wang Lu said, "Don't you think that after you die, he will directly give up on the treatment? After losing all his relatives, it is not strange for him to do anything. So, elder brother immortal, can I ask you for a favor?" Wang Lu once again laughed in spite of himself. "Big brother immortal. Very well, for the sake of you calling me big brother, tell me about it first. After I die, please help father forget me. I heard that immortals have spells to make people forget their worries. Can you make him forget the existence of me and mother? Father is actually still very young. If he marries another queen, there is still time to continue the royal bloodline, but he has always been obsessed with the past, and has always been unwilling to accept a new woman." Wang Lu sighed, but could not help but nod. "Child, you are really a whimsical child, but from your point of view, this is indeed a brilliant and effective method. I do have a spell that can make mortals forget their worries. Those cultivators can't use spells to affect the king at will, and the rules can't restrict me either. However, the focus of the conflict now is not your father's personal life, but..." Before he finished speaking, Wang Lu suddenly had a flash of inspiration. At this time, his gaze once again fell on Princess Yunyue, and he increasingly felt that although this girl looked like an alien, her heart was more like a human than most people. Perhaps she had only grown up in the palace and had not seen the dangers of the world, but the naive kindness would not appear cheap because of this. Kindness was kindness, virtue was virtue, and experiencing vicissitudes of life was never a reason to do evil. In the eyes of Wang Lu, this Princess Yunyue had become the key to reversing the situation. "Well, I think I have a perfect solution to all the problems at present." Princess Yunyue blinked curiously, wanting to speak but unable to open her mouth. At this time, she did not have the strength to speak for a long time. Wang Lu, of course, saw her doubts, but did not immediately answer. Instead, he patted her forehead. "You rest first. Tomorrow at the latest, everything will be clear. With that, Wang Lu left the princess's bedroom and once again woke up Prince Yunyang, who had just fallen asleep. Don't sleep. Prepare a few things for me. I want you to accompany me before noon. Chapter 389. At noon the next day, when the sun was high in the sky, Wang Lu had reappeared at the edge of the royal tomb. And this time, he was no longer alone. Behind him was the most powerful person in the Cloud Country, King Yunyang. And behind King Yunyang was a luxurious and spacious carriage. The carriage was pulled by an invisible force, moving steadily. Inside the huge carriage, there was a soft bed. The extremely weak Princess Yunue was lying on the soft bed with her eyes closed, seemingly asleep but not asleep. The group of three stopped at the edge of the royal tomb. Wang Lu walked in the front. His non-phase sword defense had already spread out several miles away from the royal tomb, sheltering the father and daughter behind him. However, until they actually set foot on the royal tomb, they did not encounter the expected obstruction. Wang Lu thought for a moment. He didn't think that in just 2 days, Yunkinjun had become so weak that he could not be seen. Perhaps it was the opposite. In these 2 days, he had gained the time to breathe, completely came out from the weak period of 1,000 years of sleep, and became more powerful than before, so powerful that he could not perceive it. Just now when he resuscitated Yunkinjun, although his power was already very terrifying, he had not really reached the peak Yuanying stage. Although he had already made Wang Lu completely unable to contend against him, if Wang Lu used all of his power and caught him off guard, he could at least break free for a short time, go to a place where Yunkinjun's power could not reach, and thus save his life. For a peak Shudan stage cultivator to be able to do this in front of a peak Yuanying stage cultivator was already very commendable. However, the binding force of the monolith on Yunkinjun was getting weaker and weaker. If Wang Lu approached this place again, he would be risking his life. Although he still had a life-saving card, the risk had undoubtedly increased a lot. Wang Lu did not like gambling so much, because for cultivators, in the long process of cultivation, if every victory was pinned on gambling, it was undoubtedly a road to death. However, if one was not willing to take even a little risk, then one should not talk about immortal cultivation. Immortal cultivation was originally a heaven-defying act. There was absolutely no absolutely safe way to ascend. But now, Wang Lu weighed the pros and cons again and again. Compared to his possible gains, the risk he had to bear was completely within a reasonable range. So he was resolute. Not long after entering the royal tomb, although Wang Lu did not sense any threat, he had already focused all of his attention. Whether or not he could resist Yunkinjun was one thing, and whether or not he had the will to resist was another. After taking a few steps, Yunkinjun's voice rang in Wang Lu's ears. You really did as you said, but what are these 2 ants that you brought? A king who has lost his virtue, and a mortal who is about to die. Where is your so-called princess with heavenly spiritual roots? Yunkinjun's voice contained a hint of ridicule. Clearly, he had already recognized that Princess Yunue was the heavenly spiritual root princess that Wang Lu had mentioned. But at the same time, Princess Yunue's true aptitude could not be hidden from him. If Yunkinjun was not interested in Wang Lu, a mere peak Shudan stage cultivator who was able to fight against a peak King Pill Corpse controller, he would have made Wang Lu pay the price for his nonsense the moment he discovered Princess Yunue. But now, he needed a reasonable explanation. The king who has lost his virtue is just a prop today. As for the princess with heavenly spiritual roots, she is in the carriage, my respected senior. Wang Lu indifferently smiled. What a joke, do you think we are all blind? At this time, the gnome with a hoarse voice jumped out and fiercely glared at Wang Lu, then at King Yunyang and the carriage behind him, and then at the 3 people with incomparable hatred. That woman only has the aptitude of earthly spiritual roots at most, and it is even lacking. At this time, she is poisoned and on the verge of death. Do you intend to use her to fool us? Wang Lu faintly smiled. As, do you think you are worthy of being mentioned together with senior? When I am talking to senior, you should withdraw. Wang Lu showed a moderate amount of respect to Yunkinjun, but he was unscrupulous towards the gnome. Although Yunkinjun had a certain preference for the gnome, he obviously did not care about his face. Listening to Wang Lu, instead of getting angry, he became even more curious. And in his eyes, the gnome was somewhat of an eyesore. Yuncheng, you withdraw. Ancestor, but... The dwarf named Yun Chong tried to distinguish between them, but an invisible force came crashing down on him, causing all the bones in his body to shake. He no longer dared to say another word and just awkwardly escaped from Wang Lu's line of sight. At this time Wang Lu said, "As you can see, the aptitude of the current Princess Yunyue is at most a defective product among the earthly spiritual roots. But this is not surprising, because right now, she is only a semi-finished product. There is still one more step to complete. You cannot use the standard of a finished product to demand a semi-finished product." These words made Yunkinjun want to laugh. Semi-finished product? Can a heavenly spiritual root be a semi-finished product? Wang Lu nodded. Of course there is. As you know, many cultivators' spiritual roots are acquired through awakening. Before awakening, they are no different from mortals. And there are also some people who seem to have awakened their spiritual roots, but in fact, they are not completely awakened. If they can be guided correctly, you can see their true brilliance. Yunkinjun sneered. Ridiculous. Wang Lu seriously replied, "On the issue of spiritual roots, please believe in my professionalism. My sect is second to none in the entire immortal cultivation world in dealing with the issue of high-level spiritual roots. For example, me." While speaking, Wang Lu suddenly took a deep breath. Inside his jade mansion, a void core that was about to turn from virtual to real began to crazily shrink, causing the surrounding spiritual energy within a radius of hundreds of miles to rush toward one place like a stormy sea. And Wang Lu's simple breathing caused a terrifying spiritual energy tide, which greatly surprised Yunkinjun. What is your qualification? Originally, in Yunkinjun's eyes, Wang Lu should be an earthly spiritual root. His non-phase method had a certain concealment effect on the attribute of his spiritual root. However, this spiritual energy tide was something that even a common heavenly spiritual root could not compare to. Yunkinjun had never heard of this before and was almost dumbfounded. Yunkinjun's innate talent was not excellent, but it was similar to Princess Yunyue's. It was just that his acquired painstaking cultivation and fortuitous encounter allowed him to reach a realm that the vast majority of cultivators could never reach. Therefore, he did not particularly care about common earthly spiritual roots. However, the qualification shown by Wang Lu was far beyond his imagination. This is the void spiritual root. Wang Lu faintly smiled. Before it was truly stimulated, I was just a cultivator with earthly spiritual root. But now you can see it. Wang Lu's words really made Yunkinjun sink into contemplation. Wang Lu struck while the iron was hot and said, "I promised to bring you the princess with heavenly spiritual root, so of course, I have to bring you the freshest one. Then, I will personally perform in front of you how to let the princess be reborn and awaken her true heavenly spiritual root." Although Yunkinjun had some doubts in his heart, after weighing the pros and cons, he gradually agreed. It was just that, as a peak Yuanying stage cultivator who had established his own country in the mortal world, his thinking was very fast. "Next, are you going to tell me that you need my help with this method of rebirth?" Wang Lu said with a smile. "Sure enough, I can't hide it from Senior. There are indeed some things that I need your help with. Regarding the method to perfectly stimulate the recessive spiritual root, although I understand the principle, my cultivation base is not high enough, so I can't skillfully use it. At least in this case, I don't have full confidence that I can perfectly stimulate the latent talent of a poisoned princess." Yunkinjun was silent for a moment, and then said, "You want me to help her detoxify the poison? Just for this? The key is that I have to use magical power to directly extract the poison from her body. I can't use the 10,000 spirit blood to fight poison with poison. That will likely have an unpredictable impact on my next work. So that's how it is. A mortal poisoned by the carrion grass can't be detoxified with the 10,000 spirit blood. Wanting to use magical power to save her life is indeed not an easy task. But, is this really a necessary step to awaken the heavenly spiritual root?" Yunkinjun asked with some interest. Wang Lu said, "Regardless of whether it is or not, how much of a loss would it be for Senior to detoxify her? Fine, I will help you this once." Just as Yunkinjun's voice fell, the sound of Princess Yunyue's painful coughs resounded in the carriage. At the same time, a faint black fog also rose from the carriage, as if it was pulled out by an invisible force. Seeing this, Wang Lu's eyes narrowed. This Yunkinjun's recovery speed was even faster than what he expected. He was able to casually catch the fatal poison of the rotten corpse grass. This method was indeed brilliant, exceptionally brilliant. Now, the poison in her body has been removed. Do whatever you want to do. Wang Lu nodded, turned around, and waved his hand. The spacious carriage immediately opened up, revealing a large soft bed inside. Princess Yunue, dressed in splendid attire, was sitting timidly on the soft bed. Her face was pale and looked very weak, but her expression showed a firmness that did not match her age. Then, Wang Lu did not go straight to the soft bed, but came to the side of King Yunyang and stared at him. At this time, under the gaze of Wang Lu, King Yunyang seemed to be in a trance. Wang Lu snapped, "Even now, do you still want to hesitate and act like a little girl?" Being roared by Wang Lu, King Yunyang's whole body shook, and the confusion in his eyes was gradually replaced by clarity. This king, who had been in power for decades, finally found his decisiveness. He handed a delicate sachet to Wang Lu. Wang Lu took the sachet, turned around, and came to the bedside. "Princess Yunue, do you know what you will face next?" Princess Yunue had just recovered from a serious illness and was still very weak. She could only reluctantly nod, unable to open her mouth. "Very good." With a solemn look, Wang Lu handed the sachet to Yunue. However, at the same time, Yunken suddenly shouted, "What is in that sachet?" A surge of invisible force came at him, but Wang Lu just happened to take a step to the side. Seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, he managed to cut off that force. Although he was shaken to the point of bleeding from his 7 orifices, the sachet finally fell into Yunue's hand. The next moment, Yunken roar shocked hundreds of miles away. "Kid, you dare!" In the face of the wrath of an ancestor who was close to deity stage, Wang Lu was calm and composed. His non-phase sword defense set up an impregnable defense, firmly protecting King Yunyang and his daughter. Then, he slowly turned his head and looked at the distant stone tablet that should have been broken. Like a ripple of water, it slowly repaired the broken place. The characters on its surface also gradually lit up, releasing an unparalleled power. At this point, Wang Lu finally laughed out loud. "Of course I dare. To deal with a prisoner, why wouldn't I dare?" Chapter 390. The monolith in the royal tomb was restored at an astonishing speed. And along with the restoration of the monolith, the huge array that Yunken had set up for himself also resumed its operation. A tremendous force that could pull all living things in the world, along the orbit of space and even time, converged on the monolith. At this moment, all the creatures in the vast land of the Cloud Country were summoned by the monolith, releasing an elusive and mysterious force to resist the source of all the threats. Yunken, the root cause of your resurrection is King Yunyang's lack of virtue. Otherwise, this monolith, which is maintained by the fate of the country, would not have revealed a flaw in your resurrection. A king's lack of virtue is indeed the most serious evil act that damages the fate of the country. King Yunyang ordered his men to slaughter the villagers of his country, which is an unforgivable crime. Even 100 deaths would not be enough to atone for it. Therefore, no matter how he compensates later on, the scar on the monolith is irreparable. But conversely, the virtue of a king can make the fate of the country unprecedentedly strong, and any crack can be repaired. Indeed, although King Yunyang is wise, he has no virtue. However, King Yunyang's daughter, Princess Yunue, has the most rare virtue in the royal family: sacrifice and dedication. She is willing to use her own death to make up for her father's sin, willing to use her own sacrifice to help the people of the Cloud Country. Although her wish is immature, it is also pure. Such a virtue is worthy of being called a sage. So when I discovered that Princess Yunue possessed such a rare aptitude, I thought of a simple solution. As long as the immoral emperor abdicates his throne, all the problems will be solved, won't they? Of course, the abdication ceremony involves too many things. It is impossible to follow the normal procedure in a short period of time. However, there is also a shortcut. When the life and death of the country is at stake, only the king, the successor, and a highly respected witness are needed to carry out the simplest abdication ceremony, which is what you just saw. That sachet is my modified mustard seed bag, which contains the imperial jade seal of the Cloud Country. And when the imperial jade seal falls into the hands of Yunue, the virtue of the king will be bestowed to the common people, and the monolith will be restored to its original state. Even the only hidden danger, the poison in Yunue's body, was personally removed by you, so that the whole thing is flawless. Isn't it very interesting? Wang Lu's complacent smile completely enraged Yunkinjun. Boy, how dare you? How dare you play this kind of trick in front of me? The voice in the royal tomb was sometimes like 10,000 bolts of thunder, shaking one's heart and soul, and sometimes it was like rolling waves, gentle yet firm. Amidst the intense changes between hardness and softness, speed and slowness, it inevitably became distorted and illusory. Wang Lu stubbornly maintained his non-phase sword defense. Regardless of the thousands of changes in the outside world, he firmly guarded the area within a radius of 10 meters. And from that pure sword light, if someone was observant, it would not be difficult to see that he had already used his innate vitality. However, the biggest reason why Yunkinjun was able to maintain the three-zhong sword defense was because of his rapid weakening. The moment the monolith repaired itself, his strength had fallen from the peak to the lowest point. He was even weaker than when he was resuscitated 2 days ago. Moreover, this weakness was still getting worse. Although his roar did not diminish, he no longer had the power to control life and death. Otherwise, if Wang Lu could not even protect himself, how could he protect the two mortals behind him? After a moment of stalemate, the situation finally gradually slid to one side. Wang Lu's sword defense became more and more stable, while Yunkinjun's roar became more and more angry. Boy, I will let you die a miserable death. You will forever wail for your stupidity under the humiliation of 10 million strange insects. I will let you receive new punishment every day, endlessly repeating the painful cycle of life and death. I will cut every person you cherish into pieces in front of you, grind their bones and scatter their ashes. I curse you. I curse you to be ragged, to have your hair fall off, to sweat like pus, to be surrounded by a stench, and to be in a trance. Yunkinjun's every roar, every curse, was not only a strong sweeping sound wave, but also a profound spell, which attacked Wang Lu from all directions. And once Wang Lu made the slightest mistake, his non-phase sword defense would collapse, and he himself would die under Yunkinjun's crazy counterattack. With the means of a peak Yuanying stage cultivator, not only the intensity of this attack was astonishing, it was also pervasive, strange, and difficult to guard against. Yuanying stage cultivator's brilliant use of power was far above that of Shudon stage cultivator. It stood to reason that there was no Shudon stage cultivator in this world who could save their life under Yunkinjun's desperate counterattack. However, Yunkinjun encountered Wang Lu, the defensive power that no Shudon stage cultivator in this world could compete with Wang Lu. Although Wang Lu's non-phase sword art had only reached the 45th layer, which was far away from his master supreme realm of more than 100 layers, under Yunkinjun's hundreds of changes, Wang Lu was able to withstand all of Yunkinjun's attacks by remaining unchanged. And for Wang Lu, this was a rare opportunity. Attacked by Yunkinjun's various means, his non-phase sword chi, non-phase sword bone. Everything in the non-phase method system was subjected to an unprecedented severe test. How could a peak Yuanying stage cultivator be ordinary? Even if his power was greatly weakened and suppressed, the means that the other side could use were still far above him. Every roar, every curse contained a Yuanying stage cultivator's understanding of the way of spells and even the nature of the world. The use of power was exquisite and peerless, and the efficiency was far higher than that of a small Shudon stage cultivator like him. What was more frightening was that every attack of the other side seemed to come from a place that he could not predict, that he could not imagine. Sometimes, even when he was facing a disaster, he was still in a daze. However, it was also at this time that his 1 year of bitter training broke out with amazing results. Sometimes by relying on his powerful deduction ability to speculate, sometimes by relying on the keen intuition provided by his non-phase immortal heart, and sometimes by relying on the law of non-phase engraved in his jade mansion and sword bone, Wang Lu solved the difficult problem that Yunkinjun gave him at an astonishing speed. And many of the tricks that were difficult to understand during his bitter training, at this time one by one, they were integrated, and a brand new door opened up in front of Wang Lu. Along with the rapid consumption of his magical power and the burning of his innate vitality, Wang Lu only felt that his strength was rising steadily. Because with the same amount of power, he was able to exert a higher efficiency. The confrontation with Yunkinjun only lasted for a moment, but it was as if he had experienced a long period of closed-door training, and the harvest was quite abundant. On the other side, Yunkinjun found it increasingly difficult to continue. He had thousands of means, but he could not break Wang Lu's non-phase sword defense, could not kill Princess Yunue who was sitting on the soft bed, and could not overturn the suppression monolith above his head. Under this situation, he gradually realized that he had lost the opportunity to make a comeback. However, he still did not want to give up. He was an arrow at the end of its flight, but so was his opponent. Although Wang Lu's sublimation was clearly visible, his magical power consumption was also clearly visible. He was a shoot-on-stage cultivator and not a king pill cultivator, so his magical power regeneration speed was not fast. Even if he was a king pill cultivator, it was impossible for him to withstand the magical power consumption of his non-phase sword defense. As long as he persisted for a while, his magical power would be exhausted. Even without waiting for Wang Lu's magical power to be exhausted, because the weaker his magical power was, the more difficult it would be to support his non-phase sword defense, and the easier it would be for him to make mistakes. Wang Lu was able to support himself in front of a peak Yuanying stage cultivator, relying on his perfect defense. As long as he revealed a flaw, the seemingly perfect non-phase sword defense would immediately collapse. However, when Yunkinjun clearly felt that Wang Lu's magical power was about to be exhausted before him, he suddenly saw Wang Lu sigh, put his left hand into his waist, took out a sparkling blue porcelain bottle, popped the cork with his thumb, and then put the bottle into his mouth. The next moment, Wang Lu's magical power was restored to its peak level. Wang Lu looked shocked, and the flaw in his non-phase sword defense disappeared without a trace. You! At this moment, Yunkinjun even temporarily stopped his attack and looked at Wang Lu in disbelief. Wang Lu curled his lips. Haven't you ever seen someone take medicine? Ha, take medicine. Yes, he was an elite disciple from a prestigious sect. How could he not have elixirs? Although the elixirs that could instantly restore one's magical power were precious, he certainly had them. Thinking of this, Yunkinjun instantly lost all desire to continue resisting. Trying to compete with a cultivator who was filled with miraculous pills in terms of patience? What kind of stupid person could come up with such an idea? After a long silence, Yunkinjun opened his mouth again, but this time, his voice was much softer. Very good. It's really an eye-opener. In the royal tomb, Yunkinjun's voice drifted like a ghost for a long time. You did use your little trick to successfully trick me once. Such an experience, even in my lifetime, is unprecedented. It is indeed an eye-opener. Wang Lu still persisted in his non-phase sword defense and nodded. Thank you for your compliment. Were it not for my unintentional scheme, Senior would have cleaned me up the first time we met. Humph, you don't have to use this seemingly modest, but actually arrogant posture to show off your victory. Yunkinjun coldly smiled. Do you think this is the end of it? Wang Lu said, of course not, there are still 2 tales left. One is that dwarf named Yun Chong, which I need to spend some time on. The other one, are you referring to the 10,000 poison water in my chest? Yunkinjun smiled even more proudly. I know that Yun Chong is not your opponent. In order to recover as soon as possible, I have already sucked all of his vitality. And after seeing your sword defense, I don't think that the 10,000 poison water could do anything to you. But do you think you're the only one who knows how to hold back? Wang Lu gradually had a bad premonition. Yunkinjun was right. He was not the only one in the world who was smart. Along the way, he fought the strong with the weak, and his biggest chance of winning lay in his unintentional scheme. However, was Yunkinjun really unprepared from the beginning to the end? For a 1,000-year-old demon, this kind of conjecture was too naive. Just as he was thinking about this, suddenly, a cough came from behind him. A little bit of blood passed over Wang Lu's shoulder and fell to the ground in front of him. Without looking back, Wang Lu had already guessed that there was a problem with Princess Yunyue. Yunkinjun really did hold back. Listening to the increasingly rapid sound of coughing blood behind him, Wang Lu could not help but close his eyes, feeling a sense of heroism that came from the 9 peaks of the mountain. Some things, perhaps, could not be solved satisfactorily. But Wang Lu opened his eyes and put his right hand into his bosom. There was a bottle of boiling blood. Chapter 391. The world was beautiful and cruel. The river was clear and the sea was calm, the country was prosperous, and the people were at peace. This was undoubtedly a beautiful picture. However, everyone knew that the prelude to this picture was inevitably accompanied by a cruel and tragic fight. Without the bloody struggle of the founding generals and soldiers, there would be no peaceful development for future generations. In the same way, when you make a good wish, you must be aware that in order to realize this good wish, you may need to make a cruel choice. Princess Yunhua was willing to sacrifice herself to achieve others, which was undoubtedly a beautiful and noble sentiment. Because of this sentiment, Wang Lu did not hesitate to take risks to design and participate in the implementation of a plan that was as close to perfect as possible. If Wang Lu's plan could be smoothly implemented from the beginning to the end, the result would be perfect. Princess Yunhua would be reborn, Yunkanjun would continue to be suppressed under the monolith, and Yun Chong, the usurper, would not live to the end. The Cloud Country would avoid a disaster that would affect the whole country. As for King Yunyang, perhaps after abdicating, he would have enough leisure time to start a new life. And Wang Lu, who had successfully solved all the problems, would presumably get a lot of rewards, the rewards of the immortal dreamland. But would things really go so smoothly? Wang Lu could look forward to it, but he could not plan to do so. In the face of such a complex and dangerous situation, all the plans that could be made must be done, and the worst-case scenario must be taken into account. Although 2 days was limited, at least one thing could be done. 10,000 spirit blood? When Wang Lu took out a bottle of boiling blood from his bosom, Yunkanjun was surprised. You actually, really got the 10,000 spirit blood? At this time, even King Yunyang did not expect that Wang Lu could actually take out the 10,000 spirit blood. Immortal, where? Where did you get the 10,000 spirit blood? Wang Lu lightly said. In one day, do you think it's enough for me to collect the blood of 10,000 kinds of spiritual creatures? King Yunyang suddenly felt a chill all over his body. Although he had personally ordered his men to collect the 10,000 spirit blood for him, and had indeed caused a lot of killing, but compared to Wang Lu's understated attitude, how could they be mentioned in the same breath? Immortals and mortals were different. It was not a lie. Regarding King Yunyang's fear, Wang Lu was not in the mood to explain. Of course, he could not do something like killing innocent people. Although this was an immortal dreamland, Wang Lu still had too many reasons to keep himself rational here. Although a day's time was not enough for him to collect the blood of 10,000 spiritual creatures, it was enough for him to execute the prisoners on death row in Yunyang City in advance, and there was still not enough left. Looking at the present world, even if the Yun nation was prosperous and its people were at peace, how could there not be a few people who deserved to be killed among the millions of people in the nation? Wang Lu was not immortal, so he did not need to abide by the rules of the mortal world. The people killed by Wang Lu ranged from corrupt officials who were in charge of cities and territories, to local ruffians who committed many crimes in the marketplace. With the eyes of a cultivator, he could clearly distinguish between good and evil, black and white. In just half a day, he had killed thousands of people, and finally, he had collected enough blood. In fact, Wang Lu always wanted to laugh. How stupid was King Yunyang to let his men openly slaughter an entire village to collect the 10,000 spirit blood. If he wanted to kill people, there were too many means, right? Perhaps because he had been in the position of a king for a long time, King Yunyang could not put his vision down, or perhaps because he had been a wise king for too long, he could not think of those crooked ways. And the urgency and secrecy of the matter made it impossible for him to discuss it with other people. But in short, for Wang Lu, collecting the 10,000 spirit blood had never been a problem. The problem was that, no matter how tactful and ingenious the method of collecting it was, the blood of thousands of people must contain cruelty and sin. Once it was drunk, whether it was voluntary or forced, whether it was knowingly or unknowingly, one would bear the original sin. And for Wang Lu, who needed to create a virtuous king, this was a very difficult condition to accept. Perhaps with Yunyue's good character, it was enough to offset this original sin, but Wang Lu did not want to easily gamble. Facing a peak Yuanying stage expert, he must firmly grasp any chance of winning. However, if the suppression was successful, there would be a bit more leeway. The influence of the virtuous king on the monolith must exceed a certain range before it would materialize. In other words, one must be extremely evil to disintegrate the monolith, and one must be a virtuous person to remold the monolith. Therefore, after the remold, even if Yunyue occasionally lost her virtue, it would not affect the overall situation. And at this time, the value of the 10,000 spirit blood could be vividly reflected. Yunkanjun was suppressed under the monolith, and now, he only had the strength to struggle at death's door. It was only a matter of time before he was completely suppressed. And as long as Princess Yunyue was healthy, there would be no room for Yunkanjun to make a comeback. Refining the 10,000 spirit blood into a life-saving elixir was as easy as lifting a finger for Wang Lu. He had already prepared all the intermediate materials in his mustard seed bag, so he could start refining at any time. Seeing that Princess Yunue began to cough up blood again, he immediately took out the furnace and began to refine the elixir. The precious herbs that he brought from Spirit Sword Mountain were thrown into the furnace by him regardless of the cost. Then, he uncovered a talisman and ignited the Samadhi True Fire that was personally sealed by the sixth elder, which then poured into the furnace. In just a moment, a crystal-clear elixir jumped out of the furnace and fell into Wang Lu's hand. The elixir refined with the Samadhi True Fire from top-rank spirit grass seemed to have its own intelligence. It spun in Wang Lu's hand and was about to put it into Princess Yunue's mouth. However, Wang Lu was not in a hurry. After warming it with his non-phase magical power, he put the elixir into the princess's mouth. However, as soon as the elixir entered her mouth, the princess's condition immediately improved. A trace of blush appeared on her pale and purple complexion, and the flickering fire of life was reignited. Seeing that the princess's condition had almost stabilized, Wang Lu finally felt relieved. He turned toward the distant monolith and cupped his hands across his chest. "Senior, farewell forever." Ha 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 ha. Wang Lu's farewell was exchanged with Yunkin Jun's maniacal laughter. "Never to see you again." Ha 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 ha, I think we'll meet again soon. Suppressed by the monolith, Yunkin Jun had completely lost his soul-shaking power. However, this burst of laughter, as well as the declaration in it, made Wang Lu's heart palpitate like never before. He turned his head. On the soft bed, Princess Yunue's complexion was rosy, her eyes were blurred, her thin cheeks were gradually filled with vitality, and her two protruding eyes also gradually calmed down. Little by little, she was restored to her former outstanding beauty. No matter from which angle he looked at it, the princess's poison had been completely removed, and she had just recovered from a serious illness. However, as Wang Lu poured more of his non-phase magical power into his eyes, he suddenly saw a trace of yin energy between her eyebrows. It was faintly discernible, but it did not go away. Moreover, as the princess's vitality gradually became exuberant, that trace of yin energy also seemed to come alive and gradually spread out. Wang Lu's complexion changed. He knew that this must be the trick that Yunkin Jun had done in the princess's body. That old monster was really cunning. Not only did he not remove the toxicity of the carrion grass, but he also planted a new poison. His method was insidious and vicious, making it impossible to guard against it. However, this was also a helpless move. When Wang Lu laid out his plan, tricking Yunkin Jun to detoxify the princess was an essential part of his plan. And in that part, Wang Lu had to put the princess outside the protection range of his non-phase sword defense. It was not that he didn't think that Yunkin Jun might have done something in that part, but he really had no better way. Some things were doomed to not be perfect, but he had to do his best. "Senior, it's really an eye-opener." In the face of this adversity, Wang Lu chuckled, and then his complexion became incomparably firm. "Now, please see my method." With that, Wang Lu took out a red elixir from his mustard seed bag and put it into Yunue's mouth. The princess let out a moan. Her whole body became boiling hot as if it was on fire. Her sweat, which had just seeped out, evaporated into water vapor. And the trace of yin between her eyebrows was strongly suppressed, unable to move. A high-rank boiling blood pill is used to prolong a mortal's life? Yunkin Jun was greatly surprised. Boiling blood pill, if used on a cultivator, could make the whole body's blood boil and release an unparalleled mighty force. In this way, the weak could overcome the strong and reverse the overall situation at the critical moment. It could be called an immovable elixir. However, if used on a mortal, it would only burn them to death. Wang Lu wrapped it with his non-phase magical power and sent it into Yunue's body, using a gentle way to stimulate her body's resistance against the yin poison. However, after all, it was just a temporary solution. Coupled with the fact that most of the elixir's efficacy was wasted, it would only last for a few days before the yin poison regained the upper hand. Wang Lu's complexion did not change. "No, this elixir is used to slap your face. I want you to watch with your own eyes that the woman you hate to the bone will not die. She will be alive and well, and then she will be the stone tablet that suppresses you and tramples you under her feet." Ha ha ha, well done. This elixir is indeed unexpected. However, I want to see how long you can persist in this absurdity. How long can I persist? Of course, until your face is swollen. You want to compete with me, Wang Lu, in endurance? What a joke. While speaking, Wang Lu let out a long laugh. A series of elixirs flew out from his mustard seed bag and danced around Wang Lu like a rainbow. This string of elixirs was all the resources that Wang Lu had extorted from the elders of Spirit Sword Mountain's Heavenly Sword Hall. Each of them was well-shaped and overflowing with spiritual energy. Guided by Wang Lu's fingertips, the elixirs flew around his body for a moment and then gathered in the center of his palm. When the elixirs settled down, they formed their own array, which faintly affected the surrounding spiritual energy. Obviously, it was just a pile of inanimate objects, but it caused the wind and clouds to sweep, and all living things to respond. Under the stone tablet, Jun was shocked. Who the hell are you? Even if he was an elite disciple of a common sect, it was impossible for him to have such a treasure. That pile of elixirs was already difficult to measure in terms of value. Among them, there were several that even he, a former peak Yuanying stage cultivator, had only heard of but never seen. However, Wang Lu no longer looked at him and turned his attention back to Princess Yunyue. Having just digested the boiling blood elixir, Princess Yunyue became even weaker. However, she was still strong and tried her best to smile at Wang Lu. A trace of pity suddenly appeared in Wang Lu's eyes. He lightly said, "I am the one who saved your life." Chapter 392. It was not easy to be a lifesaver. There was a limit to the number of elixirs, and one day, it would be used up. Using elixirs to prolong one's life was truly a hopeless method. However, Wang Lu's current attitude was truly frightening. Regardless of the cost, even if the flood overflowed to the heavens and both sides perished together, he would not hesitate. You won't be able to hold on until the end. Jun's expression sank as he said, "The strange poison in her body was refined from a trace of my source. Now, it has already penetrated deep into her soul and even into her bone marrow. Unless I die, no one can completely remove the poison." Wang Lu still sneered, "Let's wait and see. I want to see how many years you, an old monster, have left in your life." Jun suddenly could not maintain his composure. "You are courting death. She has been poisoned by me, and it is impossible for her to continue the royal bloodline. Once she dies, this monolith will immediately collapse, and I will regain my freedom. At that time, I will make you die a horrible death." However, Wang Lu did not pay any attention to him. In Wang Lu's view, there was no need to waste words with a dead person. After a period of time, under the increasingly stable suppression of the monolith, Jun would not even have the strength to speak. Thus, why would he care about the crazy barking of a dog? Since there was no point in going, Wang Lu directly controlled the flying sword under the soft bed and brought Princess Yunyue, the current Yunyue queen, back. Next, he wanted to bring Yunyue back to Yunyang City and rule the world. This process might be far longer than he expected, but at this point, Wang Lu no longer cared about the investment and output, and he would not consider giving up halfway. Since he wanted to play, no matter what, he had to play to the end and win. Very good. When Wang Lu turned around, he heard Jun's faint and indistinct voice. Work hard to use your elixirs to prolong her life. If you are really lucky enough to delay until the day I die, then it will be considered your victory. But if you can't delay me when I escape, I swear that I will crush everything in the Yun nation. I will spread the most vicious and terrifying poison in the mountains and rivers, making this place barren for 1,000 years. I will completely cut off the foundation of the Yun nation and make everyone in the Yun nation wail in pain and despair as they die. And when I hibernate under the stone tablet, I will also continuously curse this country, curse this land. I will use all my power to permeate outwards, slowly corroding everything in the Cloud Nation. You will see droughts, floods, locusts, plagues. While you are using elixirs to barely hang on to your lives, I will slowly push everything that you hold dear into the abyss." Wang Lu sneered and ignored him. However, at this moment, Princess Yunyue slowly propped herself up from the soft bed and said in a weak but firm voice, "Jun, do you really want to place such a malicious curse on the country that you single-handedly created?" "Why?" Jun smiled and said, "How I use my things is my freedom. I single-handedly created the Yun nation, so naturally, I can destroy it with my own hands." "No, you absolutely do not have such freedom. Under the astonished gaze of Wang Lu, Princess Yunue stood up. Her slightly trembling figure exuded strength, but her elegant face was filled with frost. This country, after experiencing the efforts of dozens of generations for 1,000 years, is no longer a private property that belongs to you alone. You do not have the qualifications to point fingers at us, and even more so, you do not have the qualifications to control our life and death. Jun coldly said, qualifications have never been discussed. If I insist on cursing this land, what can a virtuous sovereign like you do to me? Wang Lu shrugged his shoulders and said, why waste time with this kind of old ruffian? Follow me back and slowly think of a countermeasure. If there is a way to let you give birth to a child, then we will use the method of endless generations to crush him. Princess Yunue smiled and shook her head. Then, she slowly and resolutely walked down from the soft bed. However, the moment her foot touched the ground, Wang Lu sensed that something was wrong. Suddenly startled, he stretched out his hand to stop her. Don't do anything stupid. But it was too late. Princess Yunue had already made her decision and could no longer change it. Wang Lu's hand that grabbed Yunue only touched a ball of mist. Yoop. Yunue gently turned her head and smiled. Her figure had already risen with the wind. Her light footsteps left the ground, like a dancing fairy. Immortal, you just said that I have the aptitude of the heavenly spirit root. Now, I feel that I really have the heavenly spirit root. As she spoke, millions of flower petals suddenly surged out from the forest surrounding the royal tomb like a wave. They gathered under Yunue's feet and rotated, forming a magnificent whirlpool. Yunue smiled and took a deep breath. Then she suddenly raised her head. The flower petals under her feet lifted her up high and she soared into the sky. Such a miraculous scene made it hard for people to believe that just a short while ago, she was just an ordinary person who had no divine abilities and was on the verge of death from poison. The current her was agile and lively. She danced in the air to her heart's content. Behind her was a magnificent ribbon of flower petals. Her entire body was filled with the aura of life, as if she was a mountain fairy. As she danced in the air, her complexion became more and more rosy. The traces left by the carrion grass on her body were constantly disappearing. Princess Yunue's beauty that could cause the downfall of cities and countries was also constantly recovering. However, Wang Lu did not have the heart to appreciate Yunue's beauty at this moment, because the miracles of the world usually came with a price. Yunue's current elegance, rather than saying that it was some heavenly spirit root, it was more like the final radiance of the setting sun. The dancing flower petals were not gathered because of magic power. Instead, it was the gratitude of all living things in the Yun nation. They were willing to be controlled by her. Such a miracle required the right time, the right place, and the right people. The so-called right time was currently noon. The scorching sun hung high in the sky, illuminating everything. This was the time when the power of the dead souls was at its weakest. As for the right place, in the face of Jun's insane curse, all living things in the world were united against a common enemy, making it easy to mobilize. As for the right people, this was the burial ground of dozens of Yun nation's kings. Some of these kings were wise and some were mediocre, but not one of them did not love and protect this land. At this moment, the souls of the dead were summoned by Yunue and gave their support. If not for this, Princess Yunue would not have been able to comprehend the method of power so quickly. Wang Lu was not a member of the Yun nation's royal family, but he could faintly hear the murmurs of the previous kings. It was as if they were teaching Yunue a brand new method of power. As the focus of everything, Yunue absorbed this knowledge at an astonishing speed and paid a huge price to trigger this miracle. Yunue, you've really broadened my horizons. To use supreme merit to command all living things in the world, I have only seen such a phenomenon in books before, but I never thought that it would actually happen. On the ground, Wang Lu's gaze was incomparably complicated. Apart from shock and praise, it was also difficult to conceal a trace of pity and sorrow. It's just that, to pay such a price, just to protect this country for a moment, is it worth it? Yunue calmly said, this has never been a question of whether it's worth it or not. For a time, Wang Lu was speechless. Actually, he had already guessed Yunue's answer. In fact, without this awareness, Yunue would not have obtained such a huge amount of merit. The law of heaven and earth in 9 regions was just so arrogant. Even though it was done with the intention to do good, it was not rewarded. For a professional like Wang Lu, the so-called virtuous path had no possibility of success. In fact, for most rational people nowadays, the word virtuous seemed somewhat illusory. After the age of chaos, the word virtuous had gradually been forgotten by people. Only in the historical records were the miracles created by the predecessors. And this kind of ordinary person who could directly command all living things in the world by virtue of virtuous was very rare even in the history books. And at this time, Wang Lu suddenly noticed that Yunyue's face was also faintly changing. Perhaps the power of virtuous could really purify the body, change the meridians and cleanse the marrow. Yunyue's originally delicate and beautiful face, set off by the sea of petals, became even more beautiful. The young girl's body was gradually enveloped in a layer of holy aura, like a fairy descending to the earth. Wang Lu watched in surprise. He only felt that Yunyue's face was becoming more and more familiar. It was gradually becoming consistent with a certain unforgettable face in the depths of his memory, and that face belonged to. Just at this time, Yunyue completed all of her preparations. She spread her arms, and the sea of petals under her feet carried all of her strength and poured down. Amidst the gorgeous sky, Wang Lu's breathing stagnated. Because in his mind, that unforgettable face had clearly emerged, completely overlapping with the girl in the sky. Where the rain of petals fell, all living things became clear. The stone tablet that stood in the royal tomb, under the baptism of the rain of petals, gradually sank, until it was completely buried into the ground. And below the stone tablet, Yunkinjun let out painful howls and curses. But very quickly, Yunkinjun's voice became weak, and then it was drowned in the gentle breeze. The devil that had occupied the Yun country for thousands of years, just like that, vanished like smoke in thin air. At the same time, Yunyue, who was in the sky, had already exhausted her strength. Her body became faintly discernible, almost transparent. After releasing an unprecedented amount of power, she had to pay the price. It was already difficult for her to maintain her existence. This price, she did not say it out loud, but Wang Lu saw it clearly and was shocked. She sacrificed herself. And not only herself as Yunyue, but also the dozens of reincarnations after Yunyue's death. During this period, whenever this land was threatened, she would sacrifice herself to protect everything. At this moment, Yunyue had already become the true guardian of the Yun country. And how could an ordinary princess, in such a short period of time, comprehend such a profound law and raise herself to the realm of deities? This point, even Wang Lu could not explain clearly. Apart from the timing, geographical, and human conditions, perhaps Yunyue really possessed an exceptional aptitude that no one had ever seen before. Perhaps, she really had the heavenly spirit root, an unknown but incomparably powerful heavenly spirit root. Ah, I knew you were not an ordinary person, but I did not expect you to be so handsome. Wang Lu softly muttered to himself, closed his eyes, and the scenes of the past appeared in his mind. Long time no see, Grand Cloud Fairy. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.